Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 741. The Information Broker. The man was a little bit shocked. We don't often see customers who offer concern about matters of the world rather than what they come to do. Northern was silent. He eventually removed his hood, his bright blue eyes shining. I am just a person that takes a lot of interest in matters of the world. I see. I will offer it to you for some favors. Northern clicked his tongue irritably. As soon as one expressed any kind of value, people were quick to take advantage of it. But that had been his intent from the beginning. He wanted to dispose of the weapons. Pawning them was just an option he chose so that he would be able to get access to information. He originally wanted to visit a blacksmith to find out what exactly was happening, but eventually thought he could pawn a few items and see if any information would come. People here would desperately cling to any form of making money, and they were swiftly smart enough to identify one. At least they did not choose to steal. Northern leaned forward, his voice low and measured. What kind of favor are you asking for? The man's eyes darted around the shop, ensuring no one else had entered unnoticed. He lowered his voice. There's a caravan, a small one, attempting to bypass the blockade through an old mountain pass. Dangerous, sure, but they're desperate. They've hired mercenaries, but those types tend to care more about their pockets than protecting the cargo. If someone like you, the man gestured vaguely at Northern's cloak, escorts them, I'll tell you everything I know about the blockade. Northern's expression didn't change. He weighed the offer, his mind already analyzing the risks and benefits. Escorting a caravan meant delays, and delays could lead to complications. But if the blockade truly was as widespread as the man claimed, knowing more about its cause could be invaluable. And what exactly are they transporting? Food mostly. Some medicine. Nothing you'd find particularly useful, I'd wager. The man's tone suggested he was downplaying the cargo's value. Northern leaned back, crossing his arms. Food and medicine don't warrant secrecy. What aren't you telling me? The man hesitated, then sighed. Fine. There's a crate among the supplies marked with a black sigil. What's inside, I don't know. But I do know that's what the mercenaries are really being paid to protect. And if word of it gets out... He trailed off, his mustache twitching nervously. Northern's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Let me guess. You're only offering this information because you think I might be stupid enough to take the risk. The man flinched but quickly recovered, his face splitting into a sheepish grin. Not stupid. Capable. There's a difference. Northern shook his head. I don't work for free. If I do this, you'll give me all the information you have about the blockade. And more. The shopkeeper's grin faltered. More? What do you mean more? The value of both exchanges aren't on equal scales here, old man. You want me to risk my life for some pieces of information? Besides, you seem more desperate than I am for the information. The power of bargaining just shifted. If I am willing to help you with this, what are you able to offer other than information? The man seemed to tremble a little bit. He raised his hand, stroking his mustache nervously. After a grave silence, his voice cut through. More information. Northern raised a brow. Does he think I am stupid? I might not look like it, but I am actually an information broker. And my network expands all over the Central Plain. He leaned closer to Northern, his voice lessening to a whisper. And the Northern Continent. Northern frowned. You are lying. The Northern Continent is a place that is not open to outsiders. That's besides the fact that going over the Middle Sea is a death trial. Many have become lost in it before they get a chance to cross over. The man nodded, a small smile playing out on his lips. Indeed, young man, you are correct. That's what the general populace is fed. There's a means of controlled news that the government and monarchy system share together. informing things that only matter, distorting truths that could make them lose their definite grasp over the Central Plains. The man waved dismissively. Look, young man, what I'm trying to say is, information is your best tool in this plane. Much more so when you have it from a trusted and legitimate source such as me. I could become a friend to you, a friend that knows a guy in many places. Just help me this once. Northern was silent for a bit, thinking about it. Help, friend. These were terms he wasn't really accustomed to. But the benefit that the man was offering seemed pleasing. What if he's lying? Wanting to use him more than everybody else? Northern's thoughts were silent for a bit. Then he sighed. Then I'll let him, I guess? This offer was too enticing to pass up. Besides, he wouldn't exactly be doing anything. He had his clones to depend on. After evolving it to Class EX, his cloning talent could now do amazing things. He could easily create a clone of himself that would also have as much power as he currently did. Although he also could control the percentage of his power the clone carried. But the clone could grow limitless and even stronger than him. Of course, in the end, should he dismiss the clone, all that strength was coming to him. However, growing strong was not as easy as it sounded, especially for someone like him. He had some limitations, especially right now, which meant his clone was also going to have those limitations. But all in all, this was a very easy thing to do. And like the man said, he would be gaining a friend who knows a guy in many places. However, if it turned out that the man was using him in any way, even death won't save him. Chapter 742. New friends? On the darker and graver look of things, Northern had just grown paranoid about people, especially when it came to believing them. His immature fear of being used, outsmarted, was making him cynical. Or was he cynical to begin with, then became immature and paranoid to top it? There was nothing entirely wrong with being cynical, but his preconceived mindset that every human was a liar of some sort, and would only use him for their own selfish agenda without consideration for him or his well-being, needed a fix here and there. In the end, Northern agreed to the deal and returned to the estate where other students were staying. He ended up pawning the items he wanted to. Nothing much actually. He just gave away the old items that had been quite useless to him since Hao had taken the useful ones in exchange for some really, really useful items. Take the necklace that wouldn't come off his neck, for example. And the main reason he had done this was because now that he could, in a way, gain items, he cleared the old list for the new list to come in. Of course, he left some of the old important ones. But many were gone. For example, Twilight Dawn was gone. That armor had been his partner in worse days. Days when the hope of the future was bleak. Northern did not break the curfew, so he experienced no problem going back into the estate. In fact, he was just in time to make it for dinner. But he did not feel hungry. The man at the pawnshop had packed some snacks for him. He called it a kind gesture, which was kind of strange. Maybe he really wants to use me? Because why pack snacks for someone you don't know, you've never met before, and call it a kind gesture? It was weird and suspicious. But since he did not want to go out until tomorrow, he thought of it as a nice resort to turn to. He would eat. If there was anything strange with the food, he would know, and maybe that would give him a hint to not take the job after all. As Northern was about to walk through the main door of his assigned mansion while thinking of all this, he suddenly stopped and turned to his left. How about you guys just come out? It was silent for a bit, the wind drifting almost soundlessly. Two figures, dark-skinned, almost glowing in the light of the night, walked out of the corner of the building and towards him. Northern noted both of them. The first was a boy, slightly taller than the girl. He had earrings and a strange spectral blade of all the indigo one could get in the night. Beneath the sufficient moonlight that illuminated the night with a ghastly radiance. It was especially enchanting and fitted the boy's demeanor just the right way. The girl, however, had a slight hint of trouble and menace playfully clinging to the small and disturbing smile on her lips. Her hair was packed in side buns just like Northern had noticed the first time he met them. However, she was not carrying any big and oversized bag today. These are the key jars? They kind of look the part. I heard you were the first to come out of the rift. Moreover, you cleared it. You are an interesting person. How were you able to do it? The boy's voice sounded a bit different. It was not the soft hoarseness that almost resembled his own but rather the strange accent. It was the first time Northern was hearing an accent, much less one so apparent. He shrugged. "Oh well, there's not much to say. Besides, if I told you, wouldn't that make you an interesting person too?" The boy winced back a little and raised his brow. Then he curved out a harmless smile. "Okay, you certainly are not good with humor. I could teach you for one thing. By that one sentence, I can tell you don't socialize a lot." Northern frowned. "Oh crap. It was that obvious." Yes, it was. The air was silent between them. Northern took a look at the girl who wouldn't stop looking at him weirdly. He moved his hands and pointed to her slightly. "I think your sister might devour me whole any moment now." The boy turned to his sister and frowned slightly, knocking her on the forehead. "Oh!" She clutched her forehead with both hands and glowered at her brother. "What the hell was that for? Wipe your drool, Sora." She immediately widened her eyes, cleaned away the drool, and looked sideways, her cheeks reddening like tomatoes. "It's not what you think. I don't really care what it was." The boy's focus shifted to Northern. "Anyway, it won't hurt having a strong friend in the academy. I hear you are a student of the non-combative school. Is that a problem?" "No. I just find it uncanny. So, what do you say? Friends?" He extended a hand toward Northern. Northern looked at the hand, then at the boy and the girl. The word echoed deep into his subconscious. Suddenly, hearing it again did not seem to bode well with him. Not that he did not know what it meant in its earnest. He just happened to have closed his mind to it. After almost considering Raven a friend, the hurt tore his heart in a different way. He did not just want to have friends because the thought of them betraying him was annoying, and deep down really scary. What if he cared too much to hurt them? But he also couldn't deny the practical advantages that came with having these friends. His eyes drifted back to the boy's hands. "Do you happen to know a guy in many places?" The boy frowned, confused. Well, you can say that, I guess." Northern looked at the girl, who was smiling vibrantly. God knows what was going through her head. The look in her eyes did not give enough hint. "If he knows a guy, I guess I can be friends with him." "All right." Northern took the boy's hand. "I am Keelan Valketh." Northern narrowed his eyes for a moment and pointed to both of them. "Aren't you two Keejars like they say?" Keelan hesitated, then smiled. "We don't use the name openly. It's a family custom. Until we're deemed mature enough, we aren't allowed to carry the family name." "That is quite an interesting custom," Northern remarked, filing the information away for later. "Well, I'm going inside now." "Oh, of course. By all means. Please do. We will talk more some other time." Northern paused, raising an eyebrow. "Talk? About what again?" Kalen's smile faltered for a moment. "Just talk like friends do?" Northern's expression twisted with mild disgust. "Friends talk? Do I have to talk to you because we're friends?" Keelan stared at him, stunned. "I can't tell if you are joking or serious." Northern let out a faint smile. "You were the one that complained about my sense of humor." Then he walked in casually, throwing a wave and leaving both of them a bit strangely disoriented. For a moment, Keelan stood frozen. Then he burst into laughter, clutching his stomach as tears streamed down his face. His sister looked at him weirdly but mostly had her eyes on the entrance through which Northern had walked. She suddenly widened her eyes as if she had made a realization and looked at her brother with a frown. "What is it? You are making noise." Kalen's laughter slowly reduced until it was just a pearl of giggles and then nothing. He wiped the small tears in his eyes away and looked at his sister. "That guy really is an interesting guy." "Yes, but you forgot to ask for his name." At once Kalen froze again. Right, I forgot to ask for his name." She looked at him with annoyance and walked away. "Thanks for nothing." He watched her walk away for a while, her short flared skirt dancing in the glow of the night, her shadow growing longer. Then he ran and caught up to her. "Don't worry, we shall ask him tomorrow or the next and the next or when we get back to the academy. You have 2 years to win him for yourself." I'm sure you can do it. She paused, her big eyes gaining a tumultuous amount of life. You think so? Kaylin nodded with a smile. You are a charming and amazing girl. There's no boy, strong or not, that wouldn't cower before your radiant beauty. She made a finger gesture as she corrected something. Yes, but please, I am only concerned with a strong one. The only way I can prove my worth and maturity to father is by bringing home a strong husband. Kaylin looked at her with a worried expression. What? He continued walking, leaving her behind. Nothing. She ran up to him. What was that look just now? He ran further. I said it was nothing. She ran even further trying to catch up to him, but he took off and leaped away from the ground, prompting her to easily do the same. Chapter 743. The Caravan. Northern found himself perched on the edge of a dilapidated rooftop overlooking the town. The cold wind tugged at his cloak as he gazed out at the horizon, the outline of the mountains shimmering against the backdrop of the rising star, which bathed the entire clouds with an orange hue. The East Gate was a hive of quiet activity. A small group of people, no more than a dozen, were gathered around a series of wagons loaded with crates and barrels. Creatures that looked like something between horses and bulls snorted and pawed at the ground, their breath misting in the cold air. Northern closed his eyes for a moment, breathing out a cloud of cold air. What have I done to myself? He was supposed to be in his dormitory by this early hour of the day, resting and preparing for the second part of the contest. More and more people were now exiting the rifts, many of whom had detrimental and life-threatening wounds. But it was nothing that the academy couldn't take care of as long as they didn't die. This was the third day of the first stage of the contest. The second would start the next day, after which the last part, the dueling contest, would progress. That was the grand stage he had created to show how truly strong he was. Although people perhaps now had an idea. When he walked, gazes turned to him and his group. It was also why people like Kaylin and his sister would approach him to be friends. Northern's face once again twisted in disgust at the word. Then he looked away with a lost look in his eyes. Silent. Before he drifted back to the loading caravan. Well, it's not entirely gone. I have my clone there. He had left a clone in his stead with a 50% power output. Also, he could even switch control between himself and the clone endlessly. Maybe it's not really a loss. The only strange thing, however, was why he had suddenly decided to go escort the caravan himself instead of leaving his clone in charge of it. His mind drifted towards Alina and her injury. Her last banter with her father hardly left his mind. He could still hear echoes of it even. If Alina was so worried about something brewing in the Central Plains, then she had to have a good reason for it. Whatever that worry was did cost her a leg, and her father his fleshy weapon of forge. But why was he then heading towards that destruction? Northern could feed himself with no answers, no matter how deep he thought about it. He couldn't come up with a response for himself. All that he felt was just silence. And maybe that was the answer he needed for now. Northern's eyes suddenly narrowed, his head moving forward a bit as he sighted someone amongst the mercenaries. Someone with blonde, almost gold-shining hair and a pale green cloak draping over her body. He frowned immediately. Why again? The lady from his encounter yesterday was amongst the mercenaries that would be traveling with the caravan. That meant he would be traveling with her. Suddenly Northern became very uncomfortable. But he ignored the feeling and wove out a white mask from the depth of his soul. He held the mask, looking at it, then placed it over his face. The eyes of the mask were shaped like a fox's. Aside from that, it had no particular design. But becoming of Northern's face, it added a subtle aura of mystery and subdued power to his person. Northern scanned the group, his eyes landing on a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a bright red scarf. He was barking orders at the others, his voice carrying easily over the morning bustle. That must be Garion. He muttered to himself, then casually fell from the roof and landed gracefully on his legs. He walked forward, his cloak flowing in the tenderness of the morning wind. He approached the man, his steps silent on the frost-covered ground. Garion noticed him immediately, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the cloaked figure. "Who are you?" Garion demanded, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword at his hip. Northern replied simply, "White. The shopkeeper sent me, said you could use some real help." Immediately he uttered the name, he regretted it. "I should really work on my naming skills." Garion snorted, his lips curling into a skeptical smirk. "Help, huh? You don't look like much." Northern's expression remained neutral behind and beyond the mask. "Looks can be deceiving." Garion studied him for a moment longer, then shrugged. "Fine. If the old man vouches for you, I'll give you a chance. But let's get one thing straight. I'm in charge. You follow my orders or you're out." "Got it." Northern nodded, though he had no intention of taking orders from anyone. "Got it." Garion didn't look entirely convinced, but he turned back to the wagons and began shouting more orders. Northern moved to the edge of the group, keeping to himself as he observed the other members of the caravan. Most of them looked like seasoned travelers, mercenaries armed to the teeth, their faces hard and weathered. But a few stood out. There was a young woman tending to one of the mounts, her movements precise and practiced, and an older man with a long beard who seemed to be muttering to himself as he examined a map. Northern shifted his head a little bit as he caught wind of someone approaching him. He frowned beneath the mask and casually looked away, hoping she wasn't coming to him. She stopped in front of him. "You? What are you doing here?" Northern moved his head and looked at her, his blue eyes shining wickedly from the darkness of the mask. But the girl did not seem to care. "I am here as a mercenary, just like you." "A young boy like you? Do your parents know about this?" "That mask can deceive everyone, but it won't deceive me. I saw you yesterday, you should not be here." Northern inspected her from head to toe and said, "You don't look that old yourself." The girl shrieked a little bit and opened her mouth to defend herself, but Northern's voice, sharp like a blade, cut through. "How about we just stay out of each other's business and hopefully stay alive?" He leaned away from the wooden pillar he was resting on and moved towards the caravan as Garen barked yet another command that drew everyone like magnets. Everyone gathered for a brief introduction, after which the caravan began its journey to the blockade. Chapter 744. Creatures of Snow, Part 1. In the early hours of the morning, as the day star was just climbing the sky, hours away from reaching its pinnacle, a small group moved along a narrow, twisting road, with 3 different wheels of cargo between them. The snow seemed especially heavy as they exited the eastern border of the capital city and headed towards a dry forest, conquered by the aftermath of a heavy snowstorm. 2 mercenaries guarded the caravan in front. Garion and some other guy with black spiky hair and really thin lids. He said little and had a focus so sharp that it could cut through the weave of reality. The 2 sat on the first cargo and controlled the direction of the first 2 mounts. Another 2 sat on the second cargo and on the third. Each wheel of cargo was flanked on both its left and right with 2 mercenaries. In total, 22 mercenaries were escorting the cargo to its location. All of them distinctively dressed in such a way that asserted their values and mystery in a spectrum, with Northern being the most mysteriously valuable of them all. After a few minutes, they began to enter the depths of the forest. The pace of their journey slowed by the piles and heaps of snow that littered both the passageway and tree corners of the forest. Instead of a beautiful lush of greenery, the woods were dry and pale, their lives drained by the relentless chill of the season. What remained of the undergrowth peeked through the snow in brittle, frost-bitten clusters, their leaves reduced to shriveled whispers of their former selves. A ghostly quiet hung in the air, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of boots and wheels grinding through the snow. It had been over 2 hours since they began their journey, and everyone maintained their quietness and air of mystery. Northern took the opportunity to change consciousness, taking an active view of things in the estate. Not much had changed, but the student union president and her team had eventually managed to come out of the rift. They were not the second nor third. However, aside from him, they were the only team that managed to clear the rift, emerging from it bruised and heavily battered. She had even passed out the moment they stepped out. Her feat was no less bizarre than his. Even he was amazed. Clearing the rift in 3 days, no, 2 days, was amazing. He probably would not have seen it as amazing as this if Aster hadn't properly explained what it took for drifters to clear a rift. The complications and difficulty of it. But now that he had a fair understanding of what it took to clear a rift, he found himself being able to appreciate their effort more. When he thought about the rift he and Raven had cleared too, on their own, he felt no less proud and appreciated the deed more than ever. Through it all, he could feel his confidence rising like an eastern dragon's ascent to the heavens. Then the situation of things changed. The atmosphere suddenly shifted. They were still traversing the snowy and cold embrace of the forest that seemed to endlessly stretch forward, but something suddenly felt different. And almost all of them could tell. Their suspicions each became confirmed when the first cargo came to a slow halt. The second naturally followed, as did the third. All the mercenaries, each with their guarded and stern expression, surveyed their surroundings. The man with the map, standing on the left of the second carriage, briskly walked forward to meet Garion. "What is going on?" Garion made a frown as he jumped down from the rider's seat of the cargo. He carefully scanned around with the fierce and sturdy look in his eyes before responding to the man. "I can't tell. Yet." The man studied his gaze for a couple of minutes and asked, "So what do you suggest we do?" Garion sighed and folded his arms, thinking for a bit with his eyes down. He traced back to the man and replied with a resolute light burning in his eyes. "We will continue forward, but with measured steps. Please pass the message around for everyone to stay guarded and vigilant. Something is definitely not right, and it's more disturbing that I can't put my hands around it." The man nodded and immediately turned around to his position. The mercenaries guarding the first cargo heard clearly. There was no need to relay the information to them. He informed the second mercenaries with whom he was placed, and the information naturally traveled to the back, all the way to Northern, who was behind, walking silently with the least person he wanted to be walking with. The girl relayed the information but was met with utter silence. She also grew silent for a couple of moments, but as the seconds crawled by, her displeasure with Northern's silence after the relaying of the message grew difficult to contain. She frowned and threw her face in his direction. "Hey, you know I hate walking with you as much as you do with me, right? And I don't act like you're invisible." Northern did not respond, causing her frown to deepen. "What you are doing is just outright rudeness, and I can tell you were not taught well. You must be a very spoiled brat who happened to just awaken and think he can stand on his own." She scoffed annoyingly. "My good Eldek, these drifters, people like you are bound to die." She was not granted an opportunity to finish whatever she was about to say. The entire caravan was thrown into terrible chaos as the heaps of snow that littered the ground began to fly into the air. The girl immediately placed her hand towards her waist, grabbing the hilt of her sword, and waited carefully. For a moment, everything turned blurry. All that resounded was a wrecked rhythm of explosions, causing white clouds to blow violently into the air, confusing and disorienting the caravan. Then something, fast, very fast, began to streak across the vaguely transparent mist of disturbed snow. "Arg! Everyone, defend! I can't see it!" In quick succession, screams and shouts of people were abruptly silenced. Something quick and dangerous was moving in the whitish haze. Chapter 745. Creatures of Snow, Part 2. Northern's clones could do almost everything he could, except one simple thing: speech. On several occasions he had tried, but had never been able to get a clone to speak. They were just like empty vessels that mirrored him and carried his commands. Even though speech was incapable of commands, they did not show any slight signs of capability of action that diverted away from anything under his command. Essentially, they were clones to the bitter end of their soulless vessels. Things that couldn't exist without Northern and existed only to mirror him. While Northern could tell from where he was that the lady was talking to his clone, he felt no need to respond. If not, he would have brought his consciousness back to his main body. However, just as he decided against it, an explosion of snow shook the order of the entire caravan. The consciousness of his clone in his body could have handled it. But Northern could feel the strain that was being placed on it from having to move in his own body alone. Letting the clone control his body would wear it out quickly, and therefore not be able to maintain his own body. As a result, Northern's consciousness would be forcibly pulled to his body, and he would be left with no clone in the estate. Just as Northern's consciousness returned, a creature lunged towards them. He had arrived a little bit too late to abruptly swing his hand, let alone summon a weapon. Luckily, someone was beside him. A terrifying sound of metal reverberated in his ears as sparks flew in front of the figure that jumped before him. He could vaguely get a glimpse of what had attacked both of them. But he saw a white chitinous tentacle, like a centipede of sorts, pull back, shaking slowly in the air as it did. In that moment of motion, less than a second or so, something blurred and flew forward, slamming into the girl. She careened into him. Both of them tumbled away and spinning across the snow expanse. Their flight ended with bone-jarring brutality against the twisted bark of a massive, gnarled tree nearly 20 meters away. Dazed, Northern groaned, clutching his pounding head. His vision swam, but as he staggered upright, clarity returned, and with it, a sickening realization. The creature was already halfway across the clearing, each step a streak of inhuman speed. It moved with an eerie precision, its body unervingly fluid, as though every motion was calculated to close the distance in seconds. Northern's breath hitched as the thing launched itself into a power leap, hurtling toward him with terrifying velocity. This time he could see it clearly. The abomination was an unholy fusion of flesh and exoskeleton. Its grotesque humanoid form was encased in pale, segmented chitin that reflected the faint light like polished bone. What made it even more horrifying was the grotesque centipede fused to the back of its head, its endless legs twitching and undulating with a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. Northern brandished his sword, already summoned moments before he flew away. As the creature neared him, someone spiraled into the air between them, her voice tearing the air with breathless urgency. "Take cover behind that tree. I'll protect you," Northern grimaced. "Do you want to die that badly?" Ignorant of his thought, the lady pushed herself forward, gritting her teeth. She met the creature with a terrifying clash, swift enough to parry the extra limb that plunged down on her. But for a moment, she left herself open. The creature's eyes glinted with a wicked light as if it also made the same observation as Northern did, its hand already flying towards her belly. Surprisingly, she made an unusual maneuver and twisted away, the blow slightly grazing her side. But her evasion came at a cost. Her sudden movement left her vulnerable to the creature's other limbs. A grotesque ensemble of one extra arm, 2 legs, and the writhing centipede that seemed to revel in her peril. The creature's second arm lashed out. She reacted, her blade flashing as she deflected the strike, though the force sent her staggering back. In that instant, the centipede's segmented body curled, quivering in anticipation before it shot toward her with blinding speed. Her eyes widened as a pale realization struck. "I'm going to die." Northern frowned, his gaze narrowing. And then, in a burst of blue light, he vanished. The centipede was sent reeling into the air, as sparks of light flew from the impact with Northern's blade. The creature staggered from the force of the strike, its extra limb flailing uselessly. "Are you a fool? Why didn't you use your abilities?" Northern barked, his voice sharp with anger. The woman stared at the masked boy who now stood between her and certain death. His grip on her cloak was firm, his presence steady. For a moment, her blank expression softened into one of dawning realization. She whispered, almost disbelieving, "You saved me." Northern released his grip, pushing her back as he turned to face the creature before snapping at her. "Stay out of the way if you're not going to take this seriously. You think catastrophic hellions can be fought off with just your combat skills." Her lips parted, but the words that came were quiet, almost resigned. "But that's all I have." He did not wait to hear her. In a flash, he darted forward, closing the gap between himself and the recovering creature. The centipede tentacle reared back and lunged toward him, its writhing body striking like a whip. But Northern was faster. The invisible blade of the illusioned hefter swept through the air, its ethereal edge severing the centipede cleanly at one of its segments. A portion of the centipede's body fell to the ground, convulsing violently as purple blood spilled in a sickening stream. His eyes shined for a moment. He didn't exactly expect a neat and easy cut after he felt how hard the creature's chitin was at the first strike. The creature, now enraged, hurled itself at Northern in a desperate, reckless charge. Though it lacked a face, its fury was palpable. Northern remained composed. He anticipated the move before it began. The gap between his sword and the creature's head closed in an instant. His eyes glinted for a moment as he saw the segment joining the creature's arm to its shoulder. He aimed for that part, smartly and cleanly swiping down on its shoulder. The creature lost an arm as it lunged towards Northern. This caused its balance to falter. Northern, taking sharp advantage of the moment, slammed a kick into the creature's chest, sending it flying away. Now closer to the rest of the caravan locked in battles of their own. He landed on the sliding body of the monster and twisted his invisible blade into the segment that divided its torso. The blade sank in with a sickening squelch, and more so as he twisted it. The creature's body convulsed slightly, pooling with purple ichor as its life came to a dilapidating end. The girl stood motionless, watching in stunned silence. Her emotions were a tangled mess. Shock, confusion, awe, embarrassment, and admiration all fought for dominance. Her face became a canvas of conflicting expressions, each one struggling to define what she felt in that moment. Chapter 746. The Force of Change. All around the cargoes, each mercenary was locked in what seemed to be a dragged and fruitless battle. A few already lay lifeless, wet in the pool of their own blood. Since the chitinous abominations of snow struck, no one had been able to deliver a killing blow. The chitinous skin of the monsters was especially tough. Sending blades reeling back with heavy tremors, the battle was at a stalemate. Somewhat a testament that the mercenaries who were holding off against the abominations were no slouches either. However, one of them suddenly saw as some masked guy drove his sword into the abomination's chest. His face paled, wanting to quickly know. How did you? But he made a stupid mistake looking away from such an opponent. The centipede tentacle of the abomination shot forward, slamming his chest from below and throwing him up in a spray of crimson liquid. It recoiled and quickly repositioned itself, about to fly straight forward to deliver the killing blow. But something slammed into its humanoid body, causing it to careen away like a loose wheel. The creature slammed into another whirlwind of battle. The mercenary, a lady, taking note ahead of time, flew away with weightless agility. Then the two creatures slammed into the third one, which was being dealt with by the old man and one other middle-aged guy with a rough face. The old man was quick-witted enough to pull his partner from the way, saving his life. Garion crudely tightened his grasp around the hands of the monster. The centipede tentacle struck him several times like a stinger, but he made no effort to care for himself and did not look bothered by the strikes. His body did not bleed either. As he saw the strange sight of monsters crashing into each other, he maneuvered the one he was holding and just in time kicked it into the tangled mess of monsters. The trajectory was changed by the force of Garion's attack, all the abominations scattering as they flew away, landing in different parts but all in front of the first cargo. Northern landed barely a second later. Garion looked at the masked mercenary and asked, "Did you do this?" Northern merely nodded his head and focused on the abominations that were now rising. It would probably take useless time to get the message of the monster's weakness to everyone. He simply calculated what was best and judged that everyone was smart enough to take advantage of it. Hitting the monster with titanic strength was more than worth the effort. If Garion had not changed the trajectory with such a powerful kick, they probably would have still continued careening away. Northern glanced at the man for a bit. He's strong. A force that powerful probably could contest with Titan's reckoning. Although the outcome would most likely be dire for the captain. "Thank you." Northern heard Garion's thick voice. You gave everyone a chance to reorient themselves. Northern glanced back. I'm not sure how the other side of the cargo is doing though. Garyon was about to speak. But time was of essence. The creatures lunged at them. He flew forward and slammed mere fist into one midair. The abomination fell to the ground with a devastating crash. Oh, you! Northern felt that for a moment. Then he moved, swiftly appearing before two abominations that were close to each other. He grabbed both of them with different hands and crushed their necks, simply ignoring the metallic toughness of their chitin. The mercenaries were taken aback, staring with stunned stars in their eyes. What the heck? Did he use bare hands to crush them? That thing is tougher than metal. Northern did not care for their surprise or comments. He did not even have enough time to care for the sound of the system that rang in his ears. Already onto the next abomination. The creature shot its centipede at him, but Northern's form was too fast for it to catch wind of. A terrifying blow cracked its chitin by the side, below the arm, before sending it flying away. Northern looked at the purple ichor on his fist and frowned. Fighting without weapon is strange and disgusting. He looked over towards the cargo. Most of the mercenaries had left, flown over to the other side to join the battle. But from the ringing clash of metals, he could tell they were not getting anywhere with it. He threw a glance at Garyon, who was locked in with the last abomination, throwing powerful punches that threatened to tear his eardrums with their sounds alone. Northern leaped and landed on the other side of the cargo. His eyes locked on an abomination that was being dealt with by two mercenaries. He rushed forward, his blow crushing into the head of the chitinous monster. The creature rolled and smashed into the ground on a point. Northern grabbed its hand, swiftly placed his feet on its body, and with terrifying strength forced out the limb. Splatters of blood marred the snow as he succeeded and threw it away. The creature and its centipede writhed on the ground violently, swallowed by pure and intense fury. But Northern didn't care. His eyes flashed with a cold light as he stomped on its head, sending a terrifying shockwave through the snow. He glanced at the two mercenaries looking at him with slightly open mouths and shot towards the next one. Just as he got there, the lady he had seen on the other side plunged her sword into the segmented section of its chest, a wicked glee appearing upon her face. I won't let you take this one. Since when did this become a competition? He looked at the lady strangely and casually walked past her. The third person also was already dealing with the abomination the right way. Perhaps she had gotten the idea from watching him and relayed it to them. Northern observed the surroundings. Two of the abominations had been slain before he arrived, but two of the humans also lay scattered, their blood sinking into the white snow, eyes terrified and widened. He winced a little bit and walked away, moving to the right side of the cargo while the rest finished their battle. It was sudden, but the situation had been contained quickly. However, people died. Northern suddenly felt bitter. It's been a while. Chapter 747. Journey Onward. Things ended quickly following Northern's disengagement from battle. By the time he arrived at the right side of the cargo, Garyon had dealt with the second abomination. The man threw him a smile of approval and thumbs up, which was strange. Northern had never been looked at in such a manner before. So much respect brimming in the man's eyes. If he knew me and how many deaths I've caused, he wouldn't like me that much. His gaze drifted along the corpses that morbidly littered the white snow. His days at the Dark Continent and the countless deaths that followed suddenly became more apparent than ever before. And honestly, he felt nothing thinking about them, just a slight distaste in his mouth. The rest of the mercenaries dragged the bodies to the side of the road, all with dark and somber looks in their eyes. They placed the pale and lifeless bodies side by side and counted 6 deaths. Out of 22 mercenaries that started the journey, they had barely journeyed for 3 hours and 6 were dead. Northern suddenly felt his blood grow cold. We've not even gotten to half the distance. He observed all of them one by one. There was the lady that had been weird earlier. The old man, the guy with a rough face, one other one bald with a strange blonde mustache, and many others. Were they all going to make it? Northern shook his head slightly, throwing the thoughts away. I don't care. Everyone is responsible for their lives. Rather, he turned his gaze to the corpses of the monsters, which Garion was now harvesting cores from. How did they know to lay in ambush? The creature's behavior had been too intellectual and strange. Was this how field monsters were? Because they had broken out of the rifts and managed to escape slaughter, they blended with the environment and were able to act differently from usual. Was this really what it meant? So, doesn't that make them more dangerous than rift monsters? If they were going to be encountering field monsters, that means he would most likely have to abandon all he had learned about monsters and look forward to their element of surprise. The thought of it suddenly felt very unpleasant, causing him to grimace bitterly. I don't like surprises. Garion approached him just at that moment and extended a bag towards him. Northern looked at the cores, his blue eyes glinting faintly. He nodded and accepted them. Thank you. Garion beamed with white array of teeth. No, we have you to thank more. If you hadn't joined the fray in time, we would have counted more lost. I am really grateful, Mr. White. The captain bowed his head slightly, giving Northern one more strange look in his eyes before turning away. I don't like the way he looks at me. There was a lot of awe and silent hope shining in the soft light of the man's eyes. He beamed with respect and expected more. Maybe their whole caravan would be able to survive because of him. Northern could tell that those were the insidious and deadly thoughts the captain's mind was feeding him. Indeed, his presence with the caravan would most certainly make a magnifying difference. But he would not be tasked with the useless responsibility of saving anyone stupid enough to dare death. Like that damn girl. Northern turned towards the girl he had initially saved. She was there, standing and burning the corpses with a very sad look in her eyes. Then the girl turned her head slightly and caught Northern's for some reason, deadly, piercing, and hateful gaze. She shifted uncomfortably, rubbing her arm with one hand as she stood in silent respect for the dead ones. Garion's voice soared across the caravan, his words heavy with the weight of sorrow and their current state of reality. I wish we could spend more time to give them a befitting burial, mourn for them, if possible find a way to respectfully send them to their families. But we all knew what we were getting into when we accepted this job. The pay is nice, but it's not going to be easy. He stopped, his face going soft for a moment, before hardening with a light of resolve in the depth of his sharp eyes. Lathia is 1.5 days' journey away. We just need to pray to the stars that they guard us on this journey, and make careful use of our time to cover as much distance as we can during the day and rest at night. Despite his speech, the mood of the caravan still felt dark and sour. What's with the faces? Did they think they'd be singing songs and dancing peacefully while they escorted a damned cargo to a blockade? Northern had no idea what the mercenaries had expected, but it seemed they were very disappointed and dispirited from their first encounter with monsters. Regardless, all of them slowly returned to their positions as the cargo resumed movement. Luckily, none of the wheels of cargo were damaged. The mounts too were tamed monsters of some sort, so they did not run away scared to death, although the explosion did startle them at the beginning. Northern continued walking with the lady, both of them silent for the first few minutes. After a while, when the caravan had traversed deeper into the depths of the forest, she took a glimpse at Northern and finally spoke. I never thanked you properly for saving my life. Northern shrugged dismissively. You don't need to. You can just consider my debt to you paid. The lady smiled faintly, the smile seeming pale for some reason. You know, now that I think about it, I think I might have embarrassed myself before you. I am sorry for jumping to conclusions about you from the alley and before we got attacked. Northern raised his hand, giving her a thumbs up just as the captain had done to him. Hopefully that would keep her quiet for the rest of the journey. The chances were, she was going to die sooner or later. Probably. And maybe she wasn't another raven. For one, she did seem like she knew when she was wrong, and she knew how to apologize too. He really hoped she would live. Chapter 748. A Strong Commoner. The snowy forest stretched deeper and longer as the caravan journeyed further. Or perhaps they had long since missed its end because it seamlessly bled into another. Northern, however, was quite conversant with tree types. Even though most of them were void of their leaves, looking like charred skeletons of what they once were, he could still recognize them by their bark and shape of branches. Some trees had spectacular shapes of branches. Some had a way of looking like disheveled witches. Northern knew those to be the best wood type for fireplaces. They had high combustion rates without mercilessly devouring the wood itself as compared to several others of their kind. Of course, all this knowledge had been a boon of living in the countryside with a repentant, deadly, and wicked assassin of a father and an elf from a counter-world of some sort for a mother. I thought my life was the simplest. I was wrong. All those things, and they just decided not to teach him the most basic and important things he needed for survival. But now more than before, he could understand them. With the strength they had and how attached Aisha was, surely they must have thought they could shield and protect him from any harm. They must have wanted a life where he would never get hurt. They must have been so sure that they would create such a life for their son. But ultimately, they failed. And I had to pay the price for it. This taught Northern one thing: the illusion of safety. Him more than anyone knew how perilous their journey was going to be. And sadly, he could not protect everyone. That was even if he wanted to in the first place. The only thing Northern was interested in was getting to the blockade and returning, which for someone of his caliber was not a difficult task. Even though Elena and her father had lost limbs trying to fulfill the same task. Northern carefully looked at everyone, as they each took solace in their space, some mumbling to each other softly, others munching on something. In the middle of them, a blue flame stealthily burned. "What are you thinking about?" The voice was sudden, interrupting his thoughts. Northern turned to the direction of it, watching as the girl slowly settled beside him and crossed her legs. "Despite wearing a mask, your eyes look like they're measuring who's gonna die first." Northern's eyes stayed on her for a few seconds. Then he averted his gaze wordlessly. "You're just not a guy of many words, huh? I'm not used to people talking to me." His hoarse voice sounded for the first time in a while, grabbing everyone's attention. "That's a lie," the lady energetically retorted. "I'm very sure you have tons of people wanting to talk to you every day." Northern was silent for a while, thinking deeply about what she just said. Doi. He wouldn't explain it in such manner. But he did not always talk to a lot of people, voluntarily. She brought out a piece of bread from a pouch she hung on her waist and broke it in twain, offering one half to Northern. He looked down at her hands, his eyes narrowed briefly. "What are you doing?" The lady frowned, confused. "What? I'm offering you food. You haven't eaten anything since we left." She made her eyes appear sleepy, rolling her pupils as she added, "Unless, of course, my humble bread isn't good enough for someone of noble blood." Northern looked at her, his eyes blank. A cold breeze blew between the group for a moment, almost killing the little flame, but the poor thing persisted. Then Northern's hoarse voice sounded in the silence. "I am not a noble." Even though a bit low, they all could still hear. It was almost like they were eavesdropping, looking forward to the next time he would speak. The mercenaries, when they started as a group of strangers, save Garion, the old man, and the lady amongst them, not many of them frequently spoke with each other, but that was beginning to change. The mood had also gotten better. The girl tilted back a little, as shocked as everyone else was. "That's impossible. You are saying you are a commoner?" Northern shrugged with his shoulders, his voice downplaying the severity of the situation. Or maybe he just did not know what the deal was about. "I haven't really had the chance to dwell on the thought of my identity, but yes. I am a commoner, grew up in the outskirts of the western gate of the capital city." The girl's mouth opened wider. Others too around her were mumbling to each other. "That is impossible." Northern narrowed his eyes. Now confused at the excessive show of surprise, he asked, "What's the deal about it? Why are you all acting so shocked?" Garion chuckled, his thick voice reverberating through the night. "When commoners awaken, they are not opportune to resources and privileges that scions of nobility have. Some of them would have even been trained and prepared for their awakening. But us commoners, it takes a while before our first rift. We can't afford to go to the academy and only have to learn by joining a public citadel. If some of us are lucky with a C-class talent, maybe a private citadel, even with all that, priority of rift is given to those with stronger talents and more prospect. The captain paused for a bit, sighing as he continued. All that makes it a cycle that revolves around the more privileged, the nobility, leaving only crumbs for people like us. And you need higher-tier rifts to grow stronger. Garyon was indeed right. This had been the plague that was slowly spreading across the Central Plains, a rigged system of some sort. So when someone like you suddenly appears, so powerful, of course, everyone expects you to be a noble. Actually, I'm curious why someone as powerful as you would take on such a lousy job. I'm sure you could easily get a position with a large stronghold. Northern looked at the lady after she spoke. Her face in the dimmed luminance of the blue flames was somewhat ghastly. There was a gothic beauty to her face and a sinister determination burning violently in her eyes. She was oddly ensnaring, dark and toxic. Even her small smile was... Northern shook his head. What the hell? It almost felt like he could continue to dwell on how strangely beautiful she was. He could swear it did not feel normal. So how does a commoner like you end up so strong? The lady questioned with a scrutinizing look in her dark eyes. Chapter 749. Prophesy of Death. The gathering suddenly grew eerily quiet. Every single one of them patiently awaited Northern's response. He suddenly felt an invisible pressure drop on him. If he wasn't going to answer the question before, the gaze of everyone on him suddenly became too overbearing. Northern shrugged with an air of indifference. Just get tossed into a continent crawling with monsters, he said, his tone dry and detached. The lady's eyes widened, and in a sudden burst of energy, she rushed toward him. She moved with such swiftness. It was as if the small flame at the center of their group didn't even notice her passing. Oh my days! You are one of its survivors. She crouched in front of Northern, holding his hands with her eyes widened as she exclaimed, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. That explains so much. Oh my days, yes, of course. It all makes sense now. There was not a single soul who did not know about the event of the Dark Continent. Everyone just prayed and resonated with the kids given such a brutal fate, with heavy and praying hearts. It was why someone like this lady, whoever she was, would suddenly change towards him and look at him with so much compassion and pity in her eyes. Now, let's not talk about the fact that it was utterly discomforting and displeasing for Northern. But the whole world felt sorry for all of them. Most especially those who had their kids and younger siblings safe in the Central Plains. Northern wondered what category the lady fell into before shifting himself slightly away from her. The moment she got closer, he got a clearer view of her enchanting face, its effect just like before pressed on, insidiously drawing him into a pit of darkness. Amazingly, she had two different eye colors, something he had not even noticed all day. Her brunette hair was overflowing, cascading down her shoulders to the middle of her back, but several strands at the upper part were slightly disheveled. Now that he saw her up close, he realized what he'd mistaken for Gothic beauty was the shadow of sleep deprivation etched into her features. She moved back and collected herself, apologizing. I'm sorry. I have just always wanted to meet one of you guys. I have so many questions I want to ask. She cleared her throat with a hint of embarrassment. Don't mind me. It's just, what happened to you all, it's hauntingly beautiful in its way. I just want to linger in that experience for a moment. That statement changed everything, and Northern realized. She's insane. What did she mean, hauntingly beautiful in its way? Who was this lady and why was she still staying so close to him even though he had given the cue to move away? She clearly got it, but she was treating it as non-existent. Luckily for Northern, someone was also thinking like him. He noticed tension building beside him before he even turned his head. The other girl, sharp-eyed and quiet until now, fixed the strange woman with a cold, piercing glare. You're crowding him, she said, her voice as sharp as a blade. The quiet tone somehow felt louder than the lady's earlier outburst. The brunette, startled by the sudden confrontation, blinked and straightened herself. For a fleeting moment, her mismatched eyes narrowed, but the disarming smile she wore quickly returned. though it was far less genuine now. I wasn't trying to make anyone uncomfortable, she said softly, raising her hands in mock surrender. I just couldn't help myself. Meeting someone like him is rare. The girl beside Northern didn't waver. Curiosity has its limits. Keep your distance. Northern remained silent, observing the exchange with no idea what to do or how to interfere. The air grew heavier, the tension palpable. The mercenaries around the fire exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the situation play out. Garion eventually cleared his throat, breaking the standoff. Enough. We've still got a long way ahead of us, and the last thing we need is to be at each other's throats. Save your strength for what's out there. The brunette hesitated, then sighed. Fine. She took one last glance at Northern before retreating to her seat. The girl sitting beside him exhaled and glared at him, whispering, You should learn to stand up for yourself more. There's nothing nice in just letting people have their way. Sometimes you have to show that you have limits. Northern was silent as the girl admonished him. He wasn't quite sure how to respond or what to respond, and all that just made him realize a disheartening fact. I shy. Come to think of it, he didn't think he had held a normal conversation with someone of the opposite gender without being angry at them, wanting to kill them, or considering them a sister of some sort. Being shy was unthinkably absurd of him. Maybe he wasn't, but right now, he couldn't find another reason for why he found the situation so awkward and couldn't handle it properly. Northern sighed softly and stood up. I'll keep watch through the night. He did not wait for anyone's response and just walked away. Excuse me for a minute. The lady sitting next to him also stood up and immediately went after him. Northern stopped after getting quite far from the caravan and noticing she wasn't stopping or going a different way. He turned around and asked with a dry tone, Can I help you with anything? She extended the half-bread to him. Seriously? He looked down at the bread, sighed, and collected it from her. Thank you. As he turned to leave, her thin, silvery voice broke the quiet, carrying softly in the darkness, tinged with an odd loneliness. Say, earlier, you were measuring everyone, right? Northern did not respond, only halting to listen to her. She hesitated, then pressed on. Who do you think will die next? Or, do you think everyone will make it? The silence stretched between them, the only sound the faint rustle of the cold wind through the trees. Just as she began to shift back, her question unanswered, Northern turned sharply. His cold eyes locked onto hers, sending an involuntary chill down her spine. You! Her breath hitched, her head tilting slightly as a small frown formed. Pardon. I think you'll die next, he said, his voice devoid of emotion, cutting through the quiet like a blade. For a moment, she stared at him, stunned. Then, to his surprise, a burst of laughter erupted from her, sharp and brittle. She wiped a small tear from the corner of her eye as her laughter faded into something quieter, something more determined. She met his gaze, her eyes burning with a strange, fierce resolve. Then she said softly, Maybe some of us won't make it, but if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that I'm not dying. Northern studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Without another word, he turned away, walking deeper into the woods. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, echoing in the space between them. Chapter 750. Wishful thinking brings disaster. Most of the students had arrived by the end of the third day, and that night, everyone had been summoned and briefed in a large hall within the estate. His clone had been particularly elusive, deftly slipping out of situations that would have required him to talk. The second part of the contest was no daunting task either, at least for him. Many did not share his sentiments. The academy instructors had taken a compilation of what each student was capable of. The point of the second stage was to define the uses of one's talent beyond mere combat. Be malleable, be creative, and use your talent to solve the problems around you. For that, a wide variety of tests was distributed across the students. Some had to navigate through an illusionary maze. Northern did not envy those ones at all. Others had to scale vast mountains within a set record of time. As for him and his team, they had to break through a metal alloy to rescue a teammate. The alloy was reinforced by another instructor's talent and so formidable that no hammer could pierce it. And Northern did not give his clone the liberty to change names. As a matter of fact, he was not sure if it would be possible. The clone did hold 100% of his power, but there was a subtle twist to that information, as Northern had discovered in following days after small experiments here and there. There was an extent to omniform and unwritten that his clones could adopt. To put it simply, they both could not be cloned. All his clones appeared with a mimicry of the achievement. However, the peculiar thing about omniform was that it gave him another identity. His second name was an existence outside all he was currently as unwritten. So when he creates a clone as unwritten, they stay as unwritten. Even with his command, they can't change names. So the team would not have the second test as easy as they were supposed to, if he had been there. He thought of switching over, but the day was setting soon and the caravan was preparing to set out again. Garion in that moment walked up to him, joining him as he stared at the dim stars. There was a particular one that glowed and dimmed incessantly through the seconds. The captain's thick voice flowed to him, intended to be soft but barely succeeding. "Do you love stars?" The air seemed to tremor slightly as his voice resounded. Northern glanced at him, blinking before looking back at the stars. "I don't know. I do love to read about them, but I have not been an avid follower of the constellations and their teachings." Garion gave a small nod, his rugged face illuminated faintly by the flickering light of the distant stars. He crossed his arms and replied after a brief silence. "Fair answer. The stars are more than just lights in the sky. They are arrays, written dots of the constellations themselves. They carry stories, legacies, and warnings. Our ancestors read them not for beauty, but for survival." His voice carried a weight that hinted at personal experience, though he did not elaborate. Northern tilted his head, intrigued by the captain's words. "Warnings." Garion gestured at the dimming star Northern had been observing earlier. "That one, Dorgal's Eye, is an array dot in Elphaka's constellation. It represents change. The end of the year, somewhat opening the door to the first month of the new year. But Dorgal's Eye is also said to represent chaos and unexpected opportunity. When it flickers like that, it means a shift is coming. Something that will test the mettle of those under its gaze." Northern studied the star more intently, as if trying to discern some hidden truth. "You believe in such things?" Garion chuckled, the sound deep and gravelly. "Belief isn't necessary. The stars have their own way of proving themselves, whether we like it or not." The captain's words lingered in Northern's mind as the caravan behind him got ready to resume movement. He could hear faint rustles of movement, mostly drowned by the hollow howl of the cold morning wind. It was especially strong. A large gust blew across, prompting Garion to hug himself and shiver. The man threw a glance at Northern, lights of awe in his eyes. "So what do you think this Dorgal's Eye is warning us against right now?" Garion glanced at the sky, silent for a few seconds as his gaze turned a little more somber with each passing second. He withdrew his lackluster eyes and shrugged. "Who knows? Perhaps a great change is coming with the new year. Could be a blessing, could be a disaster." A look of gratitude appeared on his face. "Thank you for keeping watch. We won't be resting for the rest of the day. Will you be fine?" Northern waved slightly. "Don't worry about me. I've had a lot of sleep these days. One night will not hurt." The man glanced at him worriedly before walking away. Northern stared at the stars and at the particularly bright one, muttering, "Dorgal's Eye. Sounds like a load of crap to me." Northern took a tentative look at the sky before turning away. He joined the caravan, silently placing himself behind the last cargo as the wheels rolled into movement. The back was the best place for him to stay, aside from his desperate attempt to avoid any conversation as much as he could. An attack from behind could be easily subdued before it swallowed the group. From the dark hours of midnight, the caravan resumed its journey, pacing through the rising day star, farther from the horizon but beautified by its grand golden light that cascaded upon the mountains. They were leaving the frozen forest, traversing an uneven plain, trying to maneuver their way through the rising grounds of the mountain. They just needed to go over it and descend. It was their best shot at breaking the distance by a couple of days and arriving earlier than planned. This was devised by the old man through the night. Garion had briefed everyone before they continued their arduous march. The route was also supposed to reduce their chances of encountering field monsters and increase their options and advantages of fighting one, should their luck be non-existent. Northern didn't bother objecting. He had none to begin with. Honestly, he was so bad with directions that they could have been wandering in circles, and he'd just assume it was part of the scenic route. He knew nowhere at all in the Central Plains. I was quite good, though, in the dark continent. The morning rose peacefully, setting a bright light shimmering against the backdrop of the mountain slope. Everything was going so well that Northern almost felt bored. The lady drew up beside Northern, causing him to slow his pace and look back for a bit. She glared at him with a mix of hate and determination in her warm blue eyes. What again? Northern sighed and stopped while the caravan continued its slow march. This is just to tell you. But you know what? Scratch what I said earlier. Everyone is surviving. Both I and you and everyone in this caravan. She declared, her eyes burning with fierce flames of resolve. Northern couldn't help but admire the determination. She almost wore it like a cloak. That's utterly stupid. His eyes went round as the boulder a few meters away from them suddenly shattered. The force sent a massive shockwave reeling through the air. Chapter 751. Foolish Fools. Northern reacted instinctively, though he had several fractions of a second to decide. After all, he was closest to the impact point where the same girl had just made her borderline foolish proclamation. She flew backward as the stone boulder shattered, as if destroyed by an explosion from within. Northern watched her soar past him. In those crawling moments, as she flew by, he gracefully curved his arms around her stomach, instantly neutralizing the force with minimal movement before casting a squinted glance at the exploded boulder. The group felt the blast. The last cargo behind hadn't survived unscathed, blasted away by the violent spray of large stones. Several mercenaries managed to dodge the sudden attack, but none could both evade and save the cargo. The only person who could have had to save an endearing young lady instead. Northern set her down, leaving the girl wide-eyed and breathing raggedly. He stared at the boulder, studying it with narrowed eyes. Garion and the young lady rushed back, the captain questioning him. "White, what's wrong? What was that?" The cargo had staggered several meters out of their formation. The mounts released bullish, disturbing groans and slammed their hooves against the stone ground. The explosion's dust obscured whatever lurked behind or inside the stone that had caused it to detonate. But that couldn't deter Northern, he just needed to look deeper. His eyes widened a moment later, quickly settling into a grim frown. He shot a look at the caravan leader and asked, his voice cold and ruthless, "Why are we traversing the path of a rift?" Garion trembled, shaking with freezing fear as the strange mercenary suddenly seemed more threatening than whatever had exploded beyond those stones. But it wasn't that alone. The cold words seared into his mind like red-hot metal. A rift? There wasn't supposed to be any rift. Garion was a leader and seasoned mercenary. This wasn't his first time under pressure, nor his first time passing this route. Though the white-masked mercenary's annoyed demeanor made his skin crawl uncomfortably, his composure remained steady, directing his unease toward what the mercenary was addressing instead. But he couldn't see it. He couldn't see anything the young man was talking about. Where was the rift? And Jasder couldn't possibly have missed the presence of a rift. That's unlikely. Northern pointed forward as the cloud of dust slowly dissipated, as if parting way for the grand entry of the disaster beyond. Then what the hell is that? Garion squinted into the dissipating dust. The cloud had settled, and anyone with the dullest sight could peer through if they stared long enough. A crawling creature. No, not quite. Slightly obscured by the dense dust cloud, they resembled crawling abominations. They had 2 limbs and legs, humanoid in nature, but their bone formations appeared twisted and jagged, forcing them to rely on all appendages for movement. However, they were unnaturally fast. The moment one's head twitched and turned toward Garion's direction, several others farther behind followed suit. They scurried forward like streaks of light and launched into the air, making their dramatic debut. The first creature leaped, its twisted body straightening midair to increase its velocity. Northern's blade blurred, the motion clean and precise. The creature was impaled mid-flight, its momentum stopped cold before it could reach Garion. With a practiced flick of his wrist, Northern sent the corpse crashing to the ground, his blade slicing free from its neck with a sickening squelch. A glint of lightless steel marked the blade's passage, even under the bright sun. Garion snapped back to life just as Northern impaled another airborne creature. The seasoned mercenary summoned an item and barked orders. "Everyone, we prioritize movement. Tessa, you, Jester and Daizo, lead the way." He glanced at Northern, clenching his fist in massive, worn gauntlets that produced sounds like grinding gears. "White here and I, and everyone else will guard the cargo's rear, buying time for our retreat." "That's useless." "Huh." Unfortunately, the hordes of crawling monsters wouldn't grant them such luxury. The dust had settled, revealing a shimmering, cracked tear in the air. The rift had torn open between a cluster of massive rocks. Anyone could have missed the dreadful thing. Their luck soured when they chose to traverse the mountain plain, thinking it their safest bet. The rift's shattering instantly transformed it into their worst possible route. The monsters burst forth like bats, except they weren't small. Each one matched an average teenager in size, composed of disjointed bones. When they leaped, their bodies briefly straightened, granting them powerful thrust and flight control. Their heads bore 2 beaded eyes gleaming with menacing darkness, and lipless rows of needle-like teeth ready to sink into flesh with sickening ease. Northern wove his sword through the air, cleanly dispatching 2 approaching creatures in succession. Garion held his own. He landed a crushing blow that completely pulverized one creature's head. The girl behind, who had screamed moments ago, brandished her sword. Using her weight to dodge and pivot, she unleashed a barrage of fierce slashes onto the crawling mass of mangled bones. She straightened immediately, her thin voice cutting through the chaos while she had the chance. "It's useless. They're monsters. They'll pursue us relentlessly. Some of us must stay and hold them here." She spoke truth. This was a rift shatter. Countless monsters, hundreds, perhaps thousands if their luck truly failed, would soon flood through. If they attempted retreat where? And how long before the abominations overwhelmed those few protecting the rear? The same principle applied to staying and holding them back, but at least then they could focus on one task, maintaining the line and minimizing breakthrough. There was a third choice, though. As much as Northern loathed considering it, he saw no alternative. He despised playing hero, but none of them seemed likely to survive this situation. It would be foolish for them to stay when he alone could handle this. His eyes glinted coldly as he stepped forward with precise movement, guiding his illusion blade through a delicate, nearly invisible arc that ended in a gruesome spray of maroon ichor. After finishing the monster before him, Northern glanced back at the pair and said, "You two should join the caravan. I'm enough to hold the line here." Garion froze momentarily, moved by the mercenary's compassion. Then he frowned. "Stars damn me if I leave you here to die because of my subordinate's mistake." The girl moved closer after impaling another monster she'd managed to slam down. "Yeah, right, as if we'd let you sacrifice yourself. Didn't you hear me? No one's dying." Northern sighed. "Foolish fools." Chapter 752. Illogical. Northern's sword carved through the grotesque abominations with ruthless precision, his movements deceptively fluid. One moment he was barely shifting, an almost imperceptible flick of his wrist. The next, a clean, effortless arc of steel sliced through sinew and bone. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. The creature lunged. He skewered it mid-air. Another twisted its broken limbs toward him, His blade severed its head before its malformed jaw could snap shut. A third abomination was unfortunate enough to get close. Northern didn't even bother with his sword this time. Black flames erupted from his free hand, engulfing his forearm in searing, unnatural heat. He drove it forward, straight through the creature's chest. A heartbeat later, the flames detonated, erasing its entire torso in an instant. His arm tore through the dissipating remains, emerging behind it, dripping with sizzling, half-burned ichor. With a violent wrench, he ripped his sword free from another corpse and twisted, his blade cleaving through the leaping jaw of a monstrosity that had hoped to catch him off guard. It hit the ground in a spasmodic heap. His senses stretched outward. He could tell the others were still fighting, holding their ground, barely. The girl was adapting. She had shed the sluggishness that had almost killed her twice. Her strikes came faster, more determined, more refined. But still not fast enough. Is this her limit? Or was she still holding back? Not everyone could be like him. Power was something he had in abundance, so much that he barely considered limits anymore. Where others had to conserve their essence, ration their strength, balance their abilities, he could afford to be reckless. He had no need to hold back. And yet they still refused to leave. Northern's irritation simmered, his strikes growing sharper, crueler. He cleaved through another creature with an almost resentful motion. Why are they so damn foolish? Did they think he wanted to sacrifice himself? Or worse, did they think he was actually at risk of dying? He couldn't understand them, couldn't grasp their insistence. Then a thought struck him. Maybe they just don't know how strong I am. Maybe they needed to see it for themselves, to understand that they weren't allies. They were obstacles, a hindrance, and once they realized it, they'd finally get out of his way. A slow, wicked smile curled beneath his mask. Let's test that theory. An abomination lunged. Northern met it head-on, swinging his sword in a single, effortless motion. The blade passed cleanly through its midsection, an almost casual dissection. And he didn't stop there. His free hand flicked forward, and the ground pooled with darkness, liquid and writhing like sentient ink bleeding into the earth. It spread with unnatural speed, creeping like veins through cracked stone. Garion and the girl stiffened, their bodies recoiling in alarm. They had been holding the line, backs pressed to each other. But now this was something else. The girl shot Northern a glance. This you? Northern lifted his head, his voice crawling forth, cold and absolute. Witness this. His fingers snapped. A sharp, unnatural sound that seemed to ripple through the air. I didn't ask you to leave because I am incapable of leaving myself. His voice deepened, reverberating like a distant tremor. I asked because I alone am more than enough to handle these insects. Their eyes widened, and then the slaughter began. From the blackened ground, jagged lances of lustrous black steel erupted, impaling the creatures in one fell motion. They shrieked, twisted, gutted like meat on a skewer. Gorained. Maroon ichor spilled like rivers, flooding into the creeping darkness, absorbed as if the shadows were hungry. A single instant, a single snap of his fingers, and hundreds of the creatures lay in ruin. A suffocating silence swallowed the battlefield. The mountains stood still, as if holding their breath. The girl's eyes were wide, frozen. Garion let out a low, slow exhale. Then, despite the tension, despite the absurdity, his lips curled into a twitching smirk. Well, damn me. The girl's hands trembled slightly at her sides. No fear, just disbelief. Drifters with destructive power existed. Yes, that much was known. But those people were legends, kings of battle, the unreachable heavens. A mercenary, a mundane drifter, could live 1,000 lifetimes and never once witness such a display of might. To see a paragon? That was near impossible. But a sage? A sage was a mountain peak, still within sight, still within reach but towering, untouchable. For a fleeting moment, Garion wondered. He turned, his throat dry, his mind still processing. White! His voice was cautious. You don't have to answer, but your rank. Northern barely spared him a glance. I'm a sage. Garion and the girl staggered back in sheer reflex, their bodies jerking like they just heard an execution order. Northern frowned. What? Why do you both look like I just told you the sky is falling? Garion half laughed, almost hysterical. A sage? Just like that? How the hell are you a sage? You don't even look 30. The girl nodded vigorously, eyes still round. Sages don't look like you. They're old. Always old. Or at least 60. Northern's expression darkened slightly. And what does my age have to do with anything? The girl sputtered. Because it does. How can a commoner? No, how can anyone so young? Northern exhaled sharply. This was a pointless conversation. Believe whatever you want, he muttered, already turning back toward the rift. The tear in space seethed, more creatures already clawing their way through. He narrowed his eyes. Now get going. You've seen enough. I'm handling this. Go back to the caravan. I'll meet you later. His voice was final, unarguable. But then, no! Northern's expression snapped cold. He turned back slightly, his glare cutting through her like a blade. Are you insane? The girl's feet planted, her stance defiant. I refuse. Garion nodded, setting his jaw. Miss here's right. You being a sage is all the more reason we can't leave you here. Northern's voice dropped. Are the two of you actually insane? Garion didn't falter. No, White. We're perfectly sane. His fists clenched. Your life is worth 1 million, no, 10 million times more than 2 drifters. Just because you can survive doesn't mean we should let you fight alone. The girl lifted her chin. I'm not a drifter, but I'll tell you this. I won't leave you here just because you're strong. If I do. Her voice dropped slightly. I'll hate myself. So I won't. Northern stared, dumbfounded. What the hell? This is not logical at all. Chapter 753. The Non-Drifter. In all honesty, he wanted to understand, but the more he tried, the more confused he became. At first, he felt like he couldn't understand because they didn't have a clear grasp of just how strong he was. These monsters weren't that strong either, it was a Tier 4 rift after all. But they didn't know that. They couldn't read rift informations like he could. At the very least, they had a perfect and deep understanding of what it meant to be a sage. Both of them did. So it wasn't that they doubted he would be fine on his own. So why? Why were they being so stubborn about retreating? Was it pride? If it was, Northern would be so disappointed in both of them, because to what end would such a useless thing serve them? Pride was reserved for people who could protect, people who could dominate and never be dominated. At the very least, from his experience, that was what he had surmised. Both from the old world and the new one. It was all the same. The strong took advantage of the weak and vulnerable. But he did not want to be that kind of strong person. He refused to use people as meat shields for himself just because of his strength. Not that he loved heroism, he just despised exploiting others. And that was why he wanted them to leave so badly. Because truly he could do this on his own. Their staying would cost them their dear lives. And pride was too reckless and flimsy an excuse to throw away one's life. Not when they were weaklings. Northern tore through the line of abominations that swooped upon them, viciously eviscerating every single one. A crude and ruthless blade in one hand, a sinister and violent flame in the other. The battlefield quickly descended into a macabre cacophony, with Northern like a spearhead, both protective and devastating, blocking the flood of monsters from breaking through and overwhelming the two behind him, leaving the few that slipped through for them to handle. Each time his sword flew, the system spoke into his ears. And it spoke so much it almost became a rhythm. You have slain disastrous beast, mangled flyer. You have gained +3 talent fragments. You have slain disastrous beast, mangled flyer. You have gained +3 talent fragments. You have slain disastrous. You have gained. The system faded into white noise as Northern focused intently on the battle at hand. His feet sturdy and strong on the ground. His footwork was balanced, his movements precise. He needed to maintain control over a wide area. He also considered the two drifters behind him as he fought with calculated brutality. He stretched out his senses to observe them once again. Garyan was already wielding his arsenal of abilities. His body had changed color, silver sheen glistening over his skin. Northern had no idea if that was an item or the man's talent ability, though he guessed the latter, since the man seemed to have a rigid body, a highly defensive one at that. But across several parts of his skin, Northern could see cuts with blood trickling down. The girl had more of those, in fact. Her face was now riddled with small cuts, her complexion pale, her breath ragged. Yet that look of defiance and determination burned fiercely in her eyes. There was something about her that both amazed and annoyed him. Why the hell is she not using her abilities? Northern frowned and suddenly released his sword, letting it vanish into the embrace of his soul. The girl glanced at him, her voice sharp with worry. "What the hell are you doing?" Two swords formed of sharp, dark bluish ice materialized in his hands. He gripped them tightly and surged forward, ignoring the girl momentarily. Meeting the flood of monsters with terrifying speed, Northern swung both swords. At the swing of each blade, a vehement blizzard of snow burst outward, freezing and swallowing the abominations on either side. On both sides now stood tall and imposing walls of ice, freezing countless abominations within. A few remained trapped outside, but very few. Both walls encased the shimmering rift, and Northern stood between them, glancing back with authority. "You two take care of the ones outside and step back. Things are going to get more difficult from here." He fixed his gaze on the girl. "I told you before, you can't just rely on combat. You need to use whatever abilities you've got. Can't you see, Garyan?" The girl shot back instantly. "And I told you too, I don't have anything more than this to depend on. How many times must I make it clear to you guys that I am not a drifter?" It was then that realization struck. Northern suddenly understood that she had been saying it all along, but he had never truly listened, because he thought she had to be speaking metaphorically. Not being a drifter yet, following a mercenary on a difficult job to a blockade, which would obviously become a war zone regardless of whatever caused it, had to be the most foolish thing he had heard in all his life. So no, he had never considered that the girl was powerless. No one should be foolish enough to do that. And if there was such a being, they deserved a swift death since they held their life in such contempt. Right now, he just wanted to turn abruptly, fly to her, and smack the base of his sword on her head. But even that slight hit might be enough to kill her. After all, she was just a fragile human at her core. Garyan was as shocked as he was, but not as enraged. "You don't make that easy to believe with how well you keep up. Not many civilians can move the way you do or stay brave enough to face the ravaging maws of a monster." Garyan's voice boomed mid-battle. He was right. Indeed, he was right. The lady had an extraordinary grasp of combat. She was fast, too fast for a mundane human. But at the end of the day, it meant nothing. Northern frowned, pausing after slashing upward at the last monster. He turned back to them. "It doesn't matter how much skill she has. Once Hellions start pouring out of the rift, she'll be useless." His eyes carried a cold wickedness. His words were brutal and unfair, but they were the truth. Chapter 754. Beauty of Chaos. Monsters were bearable and could be hunted by even the most ordinary of humans. However, that lavish dream ended when it came to dealing with Hellions. Danger levels were another topic entirely. They separated the destruction capacities of these monsters from each other. While a human could easily deal with a disastrous savage, before a catastrophic savage they were more likely to face death. And a devilish savage? A low-ranked monster had never been recorded to evolve that high in their danger level, but should there be one, a human would stand a better chance with 6 of them against 100 disastrous savages. Catastrophe, devil, abysmal, and apex. These were incredibly dangerous levels of monsters. Even a master could not emerge unscathed from a fight with a catastrophic beast. It was impossible unless the master was highly experienced, a true demon of slaughter. Now to speak of anyone facing a Hellion, they'd need extensive preparation, spend several days learning its weaknesses, and lure it to conditions that favored their talent. That was how dangerous a Hellion was. At this rank, these monsters surpassed common knowledge and handling. No ordinary human should ever dream of facing one, let alone dare it. Northern didn't have time to warn her more than he already had. They had dealt with hundreds of savage rank, beast rank, and now Hellions were appearing. He presumed that the slight pause in the monster flood meant a vicious number of them was coming. That was his reason for creating the wall of ice, to focus the monsters on himself and relieve the pressure on the two of them. Though his time was limited, the Daystar slowly climbed to the peak of the sky, burning with searing heat each passing second. It was only a matter of time until the walls crumbled, and by then, he wanted to be done with all of them. Northern hissed. Such a pity it's impossible to enter a shattered rift. This would have been so much easier. The landscape and having two burdens behind him, one especially useless, did not favor his wild and nonchalant combat style. But he couldn't brood forever. He fixed his eyes forward as the rift rumbled. More monsters emerged, mightier in numbers than they had ever seen, charging forward with savage steps. The slight tremors in the air proved it. Northern gripped the sword tightly, feeling the ice blade cool his palms. Any other would be subjected to its freezing wrath. The rift rumbled once more and monsters began to leap out. These were slightly different from before. Though they bore the same grotesque look, these ones didn't rely on all limbs for movement. Instead, they ran on their legs alone, moving as if their hands had lost all life. Their pattern of movement was awkward, which raised questions about their insane speed. They didn't seem to be efficient flyers though, but their legs were extraordinarily long. Northern was certain they served some purpose. He didn't want to find out. He just wanted to kill them all before they got the chance to pass him. Suppressing all thoughts that rummaged through his mind, Northern dashed forward, meeting them in the middle of the narrow passage. The ice swords danced in arcs, emitting frozen dust as he swung them mercilessly. His style turned ruthless and chaotic, caring for nothing around him. He dove in quick, almost phasing as he moved, and twirled, swiftly decapitating several monsters around him. He didn't look to confirm the kills. The system's voice was confirmation enough. Instead, he was already moving again, swinging the ice swords as he went. Grotesque figures dropped to the ground, ichor spilling forth like a gory fountain. Northern weaved back and forth between the flood of disasters, swinging his swords in a chaotic dance pattern that could not be followed or predicted. At some point, Garion had wanted to join the battle. He took a step closer but froze. The mere flow that Northern created with his linked movements was overwhelming. Though the leader might not have much to say about his combat style, decades of experience screamed at Garion not to take another step forward. A heavy weight hung in the air. It was almost as if the masked mercenary's presence filled everything. One wrong move and Garion felt he would make a fatal mistake that would either disrupt the young man's deliberate yet seemingly coincidental flow or cost him a limb, if he was lucky. There was perfection and magnificence to the battle flow, the way he weaved each sword and moved between the lines of grotesque runners. They were swift and sharp. Garion struggled to follow their movements, but none passed the masked mercenary. He would suddenly appear to cut one that had slipped by a second ago while diving deeper into the flood. He would dissolve into several reflections, dealing ferocious damage throughout the horde. Sometimes the strike of his sword seemed to resound 1,000 times. Gore spilled forth from places in the flood far from where he stood. There was no limit to his creativity. He seemed a great artist who had mastered the art of weaving chaos, making it look beautiful, appealing. Each movement threatened to pull Garion's eyes from their sockets, yearning for an artistic death. Oh no. No, what am I thinking? What the hell is that thought? No, don't think. Just watch. No, wait, don't watch, feeling is better. Maybe worse. Garion slapped his own face, harder than necessary, the sting grounding him. But the sensation barely registered, because the battle continued. It was too much. Too much beauty, too much horror, too much of something he could never understand. Sages, they fight like concepts. That's it. Like war painted itself and decided to move. Like, but wait. Can you kill war? What if I step forward? What if I ruin it? What if I die beautifully? He inhaled sharply, shook his head, swallowed back something that tasted like awe and nausea. No, not yet. I am not ready to be part of a masterpiece. Chapter 755, The Menace of Battle. The passageway between the towering ice walls was littered with a sickening sight, one that could prompt vomiting. The abominations lay brutally severed, their limbs cleanly cut. In some, the spray of gore was frozen mid-air, while others were completely pale as they died with wide eyes and screeches that never made it out. Maroon blood painted the lower reaches of the wall, plastered in artistic savagery. The terrifying cries of several more creatures thundered across the battlefield as they fell to the cold, sharp edges of the ice swords one after the other. Hundreds had been laid to graceless rest, if they did rest at all. Their corpses piled upon one another, forming heaps behind the weaver of chaos who only pressed forward. Northern was relentless, even though he was already feeling the fingers of exhaustion tickling his legs. He was nearing his physical limit with each movement of his hands, his legs, each slight pivot, each great leap. But he was still far from dropping to the ground, covered in buckets of trickling sweat. His swords still danced menacingly across the battlefield, slaying monsters. In and out of sessions, he would use echo to multiply its effect. Usually when he wasn't sure he had dealt a decisive blow, he easily resorted to the freezing effect of the sword, using ice manipulation in a cunning and smart manner. Northern was a menace on the battlefield, and the creatures, they were beginning to realize it. Their movements grew slower, their balance faltered as he descended upon them with ferocious speed. It made his viciousness all the more pronounced. Disastrous, calamitous hellions all reacted the same way when they came against the brutality of this sword. And they met the same fate. The experience he had gained from the Dark Continent was no doubt a great boon and fundamental formation of what had come to be his combat style today. Of course, a large part of that being formless that added to its ingenuity. The days of training with Byran had proven explosively rewarding. Most of the things the Sword King often taught him were in theory. How to better handle his weight and shift it to gain a controlled and expected result. Being in perfect control of the battle momentum, keeping your wits on the edge of a cliff, and expanding your control over the entire combat field to gain equilibrium both with your own body and your environment. With each of his movements, he could almost hear the Sword King's words echoing in his head. All those lessons he took and sharpened them to a cold blade, such that it did not matter what kind of weapon he was using, the effect was the same. Northern suddenly burst forward, leaving a trail of blue light behind. He glared wickedly at the deformed creature before him, the poor thing staggering back with a scared shriek. Belatedly narrowing its black eyes in a murderous glare, it threw its hands forward. Northern's sword sliced through the hands, the two frozen blades already making an unconventional turn. Before the creature had time to let out an agonizing scream, its head flew off as a radiant cross slashed across its neck. Northern muttered afterward, "Phantom strike." Several others followed in the fashion of the creature's brutal death. Northern took a pause, his breath slightly ragged as he watched blood burst into the air in a savage manner. His eyes radiated coldness and were impassive to the grotesque scenery. Finally, after a couple of arduous hours, he had laid waste to all the creatures, hundreds of them and him alone. Not to mention they were all Hellion ranks. The rift trembled slightly again, causing Northern to frown and pause a second later. He turned back and said to the two behind him, his voice cold as usual, "You guys, maybe want to move back? The one coming will definitely be the Rift Guardian. We don't have the numbers to worry about, but this one alone is supposed to pose more threat than all the minions combined. If you get what I mean." He fell silent, observing them for a while, really hoping they wouldn't be stubborn. To his surprise, without any words, the two of them began to step further away. "Ah!" He scratched his neck slightly, unsure what had changed in about 2 hours. They were looking at him strangely too. Northern opened his mouth slightly, wanting to ask if everything was fine. But the rift trembled again, this time 10 times stronger than the last. The vibration and soft hum of the shattered surface was somewhat gleaming with malice. Northern couldn't quite put it into words, but the pressuring air that the rift exuded suddenly felt heavier. It made his discomfort crawl upon his skin like a spider. "I don't like what this is looking like at all." The creature slowly walked out of the rift. At first, Northern's eyes were squinted as he watched its form slowly tear out of the rippling form. Then his eyes widened with what he saw next. The Rift Guardian was nothing like its minions. The creature was over 4 meters tall, easily dwarfing him. It had hands so long that its fingers were being dragged on the ground as it took slow steps. Compared to the others, it had no eyes, where eyes should have been rather. Something that looked like sharpened and silver-polished metal had been stabbed into it, even glistening with silvery sheen. Black liquid dripped down the sockets of the creature like tears, and its mouth was wide, filled with needle-like teeth, thousands of them all clustered together without a care in the world for proper dentition. Northern swallowed his spit. He had no idea when it had made it there. Despite their unnerving look, it was just a maelstrom. Calamitous maelstrom. Maybe just was an unfair word, but he had fought worse. And yet, why do I feel so disturbed? This thing keeps bugging me, like something is wrong. Very, very wrong. Northern shrugged and summoned the illusioned hefter in one hand, igniting plumes of cantaloupe flames. "I'll just kill it off." Chapter 756. The Ominous Abomination. Northern struck. Flashing across the expanse with a trail of light, he became a streak of brilliance, a blade of motion cutting through the stagnant air. His figure blurred, then fractured, splitting into silhouettes of himself, each a mirage of intent, each a ghostly echo of the Real. The blade in his grasp howled, vibrating with the force of his charge. Several hands tore out of the Rift Guardian's body, writhing like twisted tendrils as they shot toward him, seeking to crush him mid-air. Northern twisted, veering through their grasp with instinctive precision. Maneuvering past them was easy, or so he thought, until the next moment proved otherwise. Walking he was used to, even running at impossible speeds, his body and mind remained in perfect sync. But flying? That was a different beast altogether. The moment he had awakened to the ability, it had felt natural, an extension of his will. Yet bending space mid-flight, adjusting his course with the same finesse he had on land, was another challenge entirely. He was fast, too fast. His movements were sharp, but without the necessary control. He found himself overshooting, slipping past his intended trajectory by mere inches. The hands tore through the wind, relentlessly pursuing him as he curved and twisted through the air. They lashed out, seeking to ensnare him, to drag him back into their crushing grasp. At first, his movements were raw, sharp, but imprecise, lacking the balance between speed and control. Yet with each evasion, each sudden burst of motion, he refined his technique. Took him a moment, but he began to grasp the rhythm of his flight. He wasn't just dodging anymore, he was maneuvering, threading himself through the storm of hands while striking back in turn. Northern shot straight into the sky, the Rift Guardian's tendrils lunging after him in a desperate attempt to seize him. The moment they closed in, he suddenly twisted, his body snapping into a rapid descent. He plummeted like a falling star, his sword a streak of silver light as he spun and unleashed a flurry of strikes. Blades of radiance wove an intricate pattern in the sky, arcs of silver light gleaming against the clear day. His sword danced in seamless strokes, each cut carrying weight, precision, and devastating speed. The pursuing hands were severed in droves, tumbling down in writhing pieces, like a butcher carving through meat with skill that bordered on the transcendental. Northern landed, the force of his descent sending stones flying in every direction. For a moment, the entire space seemed to hold its breath. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone, flashing forward in a streak of light. His sword cut through the air, a silver arc of death, and in an instant, he stood before the main body of the Rift Guardian. The creature reeled, its form staggering from the relentless onslaught. Its severed hands twitched on the ground, the damage severe enough to force a brief moment of withdrawal. Before it could react, Northern struck. His blade carved an upward arc, biting deep into the creature's flesh and tearing through it with merciless precision. A sickening spray of maroon blood erupted, gushing out in torrents, drenching both Northern and the ground beneath him. A deafening screech split the air, thick with hatred and malice. The sound vibrated with something primal, something cursed. Then the metal blade embedded in the creature's eye began to tremble. It shuddered violently, the resonance growing, the very air quivering with the intensity. The sound that followed was like thunder rolling across the clouds, a low, rumbling force that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Northern looked up at the creature, his expression darkening. His body grew cold as that unsettling feeling from earlier came again, plunging his entire body into a cold sea with a mighty and gigantic hand. One he couldn't struggle against, forcing him to stay beneath and drown. That was how unsettling the feeling was. And yet, he couldn't wrap his mind around it. He just knew something was wrong with this monster that shouldn't be happening to a maelstrom, a calamitous maelstrom at that. Northern had fought enough of them to know that this maelstrom monster was radiating a level of power far beyond its rank and level, which bred an ominous feeling, something that warned him that this was definitely not right. He kept his eyes up, observing the vibrating piece of metal that had blinded the monster's eyes, or perhaps served as eyes. For all Northern could tell, the creature was not capable of perfect sight, but its hands had no trouble finding their way to him, which meant the monster perceived somehow. While lost in thought, a horrific shriek tore through the air, like a colossal blade being wrenched from a sheath of ruthless stone. The sound was jagged, grating, and filled with an unnatural resonance that gnawed at the bones. Northern shuddered. A visceral tremor ran through his limbs, his muscles locking for the briefest of moments. The air around him felt heavier, as though an unseen force was pressing down, crushing the very breath from his lungs. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs, its rhythm erratic, drumming like war drums before a massacre. Yet his gaze never wavered. He had seen it the instant it happened. The jagged metal spears lodged in the creature's eye suddenly wrenched free, as though torn from flesh by an unseen hand. The force of their release sent a sickening squelch through the battlefield, followed by the grotesque gurgle of ruptured tissue. Rivers of viscous black liquid, thick as tar and reeking of decay, erupted from the gaping wound. The inky substance cascaded down the creature's massive, sinuous frame, steaming as it touched the ground, as though the earth itself recoiled from its corruption. The battlefield reeked of iron and something far fouler, something ancient and defiled. The blades hung in the air, each one an ominous monolith of sharpened steel, over 10 meters long. They stood rigid, suspended by an unseen force, humming with an energy that sent a shiver rippling through Northern's spine. It wasn't just power, it was something more, something intelligent. Something that made his skin crawl, as if an unseen entity were watching him from above with a gaze steeped in condescension. Northern's eyes shifted, tearing away from the hollow, weeping sockets of the Rift Guardian to the hovering weapons. A moment passed, a moment of ferocious silence. The wind howled through the mountains, its whisper threading through the air like a dark hymn, an omen of the violence to come. The stillness was suffocating. An eerie pause, thick with tension. Then the blades lunged. Northern moved. His sword flashed forward with a streak of silver defiance, colliding with the onslaught with lethal precision. A cacophony of metallic thunder roared through the sky as the two forces met, the impact sending a shockwave rippling outward. Sparks erupted like dying stars, scattering in every direction. Northern's teeth clenched. A white-hot agony lanced through his arm, as if his very bones had been fractured by the sheer force of the strike. His hand, his entire forearm, felt as if it had been shredded from the inside out, nerves screaming in protest. For a fleeting second he thought he could bear it. He had endured worse. But then his fingers faltered. His grip failed. His sword slipped from his grasp, tumbling from his hand and clattering against the ground with a hollow, ringing echo. Northern staggered, his breath sharp and uneven. He bent forward, his trembling hand clutching at itself, trying to suppress the involuntary spasms racking through his arm. Grrrhh. Damn. What the hell is this? The pain intensified, becoming a merciless torment that burrowed deeper, as though unseen fangs were rending his muscles apart from within. His entire body quivered beneath the tumultuous pressure of the impact. It wasn't just his hand. It was his whole frame, trembling as though caught in an unseen vice. He couldn't even straighten himself. And the blade, cold, merciless, implacable, was already circling for another strike. Chapter 757. The Bitter End. The blades straightened in the air, their movements seamless, unervingly synchronized, like soldiers standing at attention before delivering an execution. Then, as if possessed by some unseen will, they tilted forward, their razor edges aligning with deadly precision, all pointed at Northern. The tips of their gleaming edges shimmered with a murderous luster, catching the light in a way that sent a chill through the mountain air. It was just steel, just cold, unfeeling metal. And yet, in that moment it felt alive. As if the blades themselves were savoring the sight before them. The once unshaken warrior, now hunched over, his body writhing beneath the lingering agony that had stripped his hands of their strength. Then they struck. The blades plummeted, turning into blurs of sheer velocity, tearing through the wind like falling meteors. The sound of their descent was a whisper of death. Too swift, too merciless. An execution etched in steel. The blade, gleaming with murderous intent, was mere milliseconds from cleaving into Northern's skull. Then, in a blur of defiance, something impossible happened. With a speed that defied his limits, Garion materialized between them, with a force of desperation and steel. Northern's breath hitched, his eyes widening as he watched the leader surge forward, his entire form transmuting into ashen metal, every inch of him gleaming like a living fortress. Fool! The word erupted from his throat, raw and thunderous, laced with agony. But it was too late. The moment steel met steel, a brutal force sent Garion hurtling through the air like a broken comet. He twisted violently, his armored body smashing into a distant rock face, shattering it into a cascade of rubble and dust. Northern's face darkened with despair. Why? Would he even? But there was no time to dwell on the thought. The blade was already slicing toward him again, a silver streak of death. Northern's gaze flicked back, catching the girl in his peripheral vision. Closer than she should have been. Too close. Instinct took over. With a powerful burst, he propelled himself into the air, the sudden movement sending the blade crashing into the ground beneath him. The impact detonated like a thunderclap, a shock wave ripping outward in a violent explosion. Shattered stone and fractured debris howled in all directions, the force slamming into Northern mid-flight, flinging him even farther. But it was exactly what he needed. Mid-air, he twisted, seizing the girl by the waist, his grip firm but controlled. With fluid precision, he adjusted his trajectory, his body slicing effortlessly through the air. The wind howled past, and 3 seconds later, he landed in a crouch near Garion, whose crumpled form lay amidst the wreckage. The leader's body was in ruins, battered beyond reason. His nose and mouth were streaked in crimson, fresh blood painting his face like a grotesque mask. A deep, webbed crack spread across the center of his metallic chest where the blade had struck, the impact still rippling through as the metal peeled off bit by bit. But that wasn't the worst of it. His entire body lay drenched in a shallow river of blood, pooling beneath him in dark, glistening streams. Northern stared down at him, a heat rising in his chest, burning, searing, unbearable. His fists clenched involuntarily. Anger. Not just anger, rage. He was viciously angry at Garion and the sheer, reckless stupidity of his actions. Why had he done it? Why throw himself into the path of the blade like that? What kind of foolish, useless sacrifice was this? Just why? And more importantly, why was he so furious about it? A storm of thoughts churned inside him, twisting, colliding, impossible to navigate. They had barely known each other for a day. A single damn day. So why did this feel like something was breaking inside him? Don't look at me that way. A wet, gurgling cough followed Garion's words, thick with blood. Hey, don't talk. The girl's voice was frantic, strained with desperation. She turned sharply to Northern, her eyes pleading. You should do something. Don't just stand there. Help him. Northern didn't respond. He couldn't. But Garion did, his broken form shifting ever so slightly. His somber, pain-clouded gaze locked onto Northern, peering through the thin veil of his white mask. Garion rasped. Even with that mask hiding your face, I can tell. His breath was shallow, each word a struggle. I can see it, the way you loathe me, in this moment. His bloodied lips curled weakly, a ghost of a smile. I'm sorry, he whispered. I had to do something. My body reacted on its own. Garion coughed again, more blood spilling from his lips in thick, wet rivulets. Then, slowly, the shallow rise and fall of his chest stilled. His shoulders, once trembling with effort, eased into a terrible, dark stillness. A peace that was more sorrowful than serene. A sudden, agonized wail tore through the air. The girl collapsed, her hands slamming against her thighs in a desperate, self-inflicted blow. Pain must have lanced through her, but she didn't seem to care. Her body trembled, teeth clenched so hard they might crack. She bowed her head, her knees sinking into the blood-soaked ground, the crimson seeping into her clothes as though staining her soul. Northern, however, remained standing. His eyes darkened. The weight in his chest felt sharp and unfamiliar. It wasn't grief, not quite, not yet. It was something worse, something piercing. A strange, unwelcome ache unlike anything he had felt before. Because no one had ever done this for him before. No one had ever thrown themselves between him and death, willingly offering their life for his. Not once. Garion, when they first met, he had thought of him as arrogant, as domineering as just another authoritative fool barking orders. But now, looking at the man's still body, Northern realized something else. That arrogance had been a mask. A mantle worn by a leader shouldering the weight of his people. It hadn't been hollow posturing. The mercenary had been a good man. A man who still had years ahead of him, perhaps decades. He was likely in his early 40s. If he chose to retire early, he could have had another 50 years. He could have lived. But now it had all come to a brutal, meaningless end. And the worst part, the part that made Northern taste the bitter edge of his own fury, was that it had been unnecessary. He would have been fine. If Garion had not intervened, Northern would have survived. The thought curled like acid in his gut. Some irrational part of him almost wished he had truly been in danger. That he would have died had Garion not been there. Just so the man's sacrifice would carry more weight. Just so his death wouldn't feel so pointless. Slowly, Northern crouched beside the fallen leader. His fingers reached out, brushing over Garion's lifeless face. With quiet reverence, he slid the man's eyelids shut, shielding the vacant, glassy stare. Then, with careful precision, he reached upward, untying the red scarf wrapped around Garion's head. The fabric was damp, soaked with blood and sweat. He stood, his grip tightening around the scarf. His gaze flickered to the girl, who had yet to raise her head. Her shoulders shook, her teeth worrying her lower lip to keep herself from breaking further. So much for no one dying, huh? The words sat heavy on his tongue, but he couldn't bring himself to say them. Garion's death was a sting. A sharp, merciless sting. One that burrowed deep, leaving a raw and bitter ache. Then Northern turned. In the distance he saw it, the creature. Its elongated blades gleamed under the clear light, hovering in the air, scything through the wind, searching for something to cleave. The Rift Guardian's body moved with slow, deliberate precision, guided toward the direction its blades had last flown. His eyes gleamed, cold and sharp, laced with a dread that coiled deep within. He needed something to take out this boiling anger on. And what better outlet than the creature that had caused this in the first place? His fingers tightened around the blood-stained scarf. With a swift motion, he wrapped it around his wrist, knotting it in place. A silent promise. Then he moved. He flew. Chapter 758. The Power of a Paragon. You have changed your name. Northern, like a violent gale, streaked across the wind, tearing through the currents in a fleeting, incomplete second. He flew past the blades before they could react, colliding with the monster's body with a force that made the entire mountainscape wail in grievous protest. The impact sent a seismic tremor rippling through the mountain, as if the very earth itself shrieked in agonized protest. Their collision carved a ruinous path through the land, scouring everything in their wake with the ferocity of a meteor's descent. Jagged fragments of stone, each massive enough to entomb warriors, erupted in chaotic volleys, battering the mountainside and shattering into countless lethal shards. The monster tumbled like a rag doll, flung helplessly by the force, until it finally slammed into a towering boulder. A crude, sedimented stack of rock that had, by some cosmic joke, formed a monolith resembling a snowman. If one had the imagination, a pair of twigs would have completed the illusion. Northern stood amid the ruined ground, his chest rising and falling, flames of anger burning viciously in his eyes. He locked eyes with the monster, his body tensing, ready to advance. But then he stopped. Something shifted. His frame became rigid, muscles aligning with unnatural precision beneath the exposed sleeves of the spirit linen ensemble, as though sculpted by an unseen artisan. The earth trembled beneath his weight. Northern threw both hands forward, meeting the terrifying speed of the incoming blades with equal ferocity. The ground groaned in protest, splintering as another shockwave tore outward, blasting through the winds and scattering the sparse trees in the distance. His eyes burned, defiant, boiling, and now that he focused, he felt it. The blade wasn't just a weapon. It was the creature's eyes, its deadliest instinct given form. A flicker of hesitation pulsed through the steel. The creature had expected Northern's hand to break under the weight of its attack, not resist it. Of course, right now, Northern was the most unyielding bulwark in the world. Maybe. His fingers clenched around the blade's edges. The edges aren't even that sharp. The crude thing was just heavy. Even with two talent abilities reinforcing him, colossal force amplifying his strength to inhuman levels, the sheer weight of the metal tested his limits. His muscles strained. His stance held firm. He dug his feet deeper into the shattered ground. With a guttural growl, he ripped the blades from their position, flinging them sideways. The weapon spun violently, crashing into the fractured rock, shattering further on impact. Then large hands shot from the debris cloud beyond. Northern met each one with a destructive blow, turning flesh and bone into a maroon paste. The hands kept coming, faster. So did Northern's fists. A blur of relentless motion, a cacophony of impacts, a melody of unnerving speed. Both sides clashed in a violent rhythm that drowned the battlefield in chaos. Northern did not relent. His blows fell like an unending storm, each strike painting his mask, his body, and the ground beneath him in thick, maroon ichor. The battlefield reeked of blood and ruin. Yet, the Rift Guardian was no less merciless. Hundreds of hands lanced through the air, stretching at unnatural angles, whipping toward him with terrifying speed and force, seeking to crush him where he stood. Teeth gritted, Northern's fists blurred into a whirlwind of destruction, each strike ending a monstrous limb in a brutal, decisive instant. Yet even as he fought, his gaze pierced deeper into the thinning cloud of debris. That bastard is buying time to recover. Surely the monster's blade, its very eyes, must have sustained some kind of damage. If not, it would have already been on him again. Which meant he had to close the distance. End this. Now. For a brief moment, Northern considered abandoning Titan's reckoning. But the answer was obvious. His body, mighty as it was, would crumble beneath the sheer force of the blade's assault. I could resort to dodging and prioritize the main body. The blade was fast, deadly, but the body remained its weakness, and it would do anything to protect itself. It would not let him reach it. But that only gave him more reason to change. Strength meant nothing if it slowed him down. He could feel it, the weight anchoring him with every step. If he shed it, his body would regain its lightness, allowing him to surpass the blade in speed. Or maybe, he wouldn't even need to. With Shadow Step, he could traverse space without paying heed to distance. Moreover, he now had a couple of talents that were more than enough to finish this from a distance. Northern's eyes flickered with cold menace as his decision became cemented. Without hesitation, he withdrew, his form flashing upward, shattering the ground in his wake. Higher, into the sky, into the clouds. He stopped and hovered for an instant. "You have changed your name." Then he plummeted. Faster, like a needle slicing through the heavens, his body cut through the winds. An imperceptible blur until, suddenly, he landed before the monster. The impact sent debris skyward, not as catastrophic as before, but still a shockwave of undeniable force. Northern stood tall, his voice cool, dangerous. "Twilight Phoenix." The air convulsed. Northern, though, had to dissolve into the shadow to dodge the incoming blade, coming out from the shadow cast by the large looming form of the monster itself, imperceptible to the blades for a moment while the disaster began to unfold. A low, resonant tremor suddenly rippled outward, igniting something primal, something ancient. The world seemed to exhale, a deep, guttural breath, as flames erupted from the space above the Rift Guardian, coiling into existence with a sentient hunger. They did not roar like ordinary fire. They hummed, a reverberation that quaked through the bones of all who bore witness. The inferno surged upward, expanding, shifting, taking blades. Wings, unfurling like banners of sheer annihilation, cast their colossal shadow across the frozen landscape. In the span of a single heartbeat, the pale daylight was drowned beneath an ethereal blaze, deep violet, wreathed in ember red and streaks of incandescent silver. The sky reflected its colors like the dawn of the world's final hour. The Twilight Phoenix rose, colossal, its mere presence distorting the very air, warping reality into a trembling mirage of unbearable heat. Then it dived. The instant it moved, the temperature spiked, not in mere increments but in cataclysmic leaps. The once frozen mountain's cape recoiled, the pristine snow boiling into thick geysers of steam before it ever had the chance to liquefy. The jagged, snow-capped peaks surrounding the battlefield cracked, their icy fortresses no longer impervious but betrayed by heat they had never known. Beneath the descent of the Phoenix, the frost-cloaked stone turned black, then orange, then a blinding molten cantaloupe glow, like metal pulled fresh from a divine forge. The crisp, ice-laden trees that had stood undisturbed for decades, perhaps centuries, ignited in an instant, their bark charred to cinders as embers leapt from trunk to trunk in a relentless, rolling inferno. And then, the world detonated. The mountain quaked, not from tremors, but from sheer obliteration. The snow-laden slopes gave way, collapsing into avalanches of molten rock and charred ice, surging downward like an apocalyptic flood of fire and ruin. The impact of the Phoenix's descent cracked open the mountain's core, spewing forth rivers of magma that should have been buried deep beneath the crust of the world. A shockwave howled outward, a tide of destruction so colossal that the distant peaks fractured, shattering like brittle glass, their glaciers crumbling in cascading fragments under the sheer magnitude of the force. The land, once a frozen expanse of pristine white, was now a scorched abyss, a graveyard of obsidian and cinders where snow had no memory of ever existing. The sky burned. Smoke and embers coiled upward, igniting the heavens in a tempest of fire, twisting the once clear sky into an aurora of smoldering ruin. Clouds, once heavy with frost and snow, transformed into streaks of burning plumes, seared away by the wrathful heat of the Phoenix's passing. The aftermath of the Twilight Phoenix was not like ordinary flames. It did not fade. It lingered, festered. It etched itself into the world, embedding its embers into the very stone and ice, flickering with an unnatural persistence, as if waiting to be reborn. And amid the ruin, Northern stood, shocked. He blinked several times. Who? Holy crap. Chapter 759. The aftermath. Even through the Twilight Phoenix's cataclysmic impact that was unlike anything before. A deafening rupture that shook the entire range, rolling like a celestial thunderclap, splitting stone, and sending echoes of destruction through the very bones of the mountain. Northern clearly had heard the system's announcement. The calamitous maelstrom had been slain, burned to crisps. Of course, under such an attack it couldn't hope to survive. The sheer force had rippled through the peaks, causing distant cliffs to crack and shatter, avalanches collapsing mid-slide as the heat vaporized them before they touched the ground. What remained was unrecognizable. The once frozen mountain was no more, its glaciers and snowfields reduced to blackened scars of molten rock and obsidian glass. A large side of the summit had been sheared away, replaced by a yawning crater, its depths glowing with buried veins of magma, now exposed to the surface for the first time in millennia. The land that once lay beneath a pristine white expanse was now scorched raw, rivers of ice boiled into nothingness, their former paths now jagged trenches carved by the sheer intensity of heat. The few trees that had once clung stubbornly to the frozen slopes had vanished in an instant, leaving only ghostly silhouettes of ash, crumbling at the faintest touch. Even as the fires began to settle, the embers remained. They flickered in the cracks of molten stone, refusing to fade, their eerie glow leaving a reminder that something unnatural had happened here. The wind, once howling with icy breath, now carried only silence, the kind that follows an extinction event. Northern stood at its center, blinking, quite unsure what to think. The mountain had not just been destroyed. It had been reborn, scarred, scorched, and forever marked by fire. He had never doubted the power of a paragon. Despite holding back so much, he had seen how much damage the Luengard Emperor could still do to him. Even with all his cards on deck, there was no way he could have won that battle. It would have ended in his utter devastation. Seeing the destruction he had unleashed gave him reassurance of that fact. Of course, the Paragon's talent in his hands had gone through several leaps and bounds of evolution and was now deadlier than it had been. But Northern couldn't help tracing the catastrophic talent to its original owner, imagining what their battle would have been if the Emperor hadn't held back. The entire kingdom would have been reduced to a flat plain. Even the tall walls. The rumors weren't selling it short. They really can reshape landscapes. He wasn't a paragon yet, and definitely shouldn't wield such ruinous power. But that was the fun and beautiful part of it. He did. He was an abomination, a strange existence that should be abolished from its roots, forced out of the natural world's laws and concepts. But who could try? The tyrants? The origins? Thinking about those bastards is suddenly distasteful. Northern scratched his head absently. He had to admit, if they put their minds to it, they could get the job done. I mean, paragons exist with different kinds of powers, and luminaries will probably show up soon. I still have them to worry about. I don't see myself being able to withstand a tyrant's wrath now. But that was also why he couldn't stop. Why he wouldn't delude himself into thinking he had reached the pinnacle of strength. He would keep climbing that ladder until he stood on the highest peak of the world, across all continents and even in the underworld. Thinking about the scope of his goal, Northern suddenly felt a chill assault him, making him shudder. Step by step, Northern glanced around again. The scene was truly terrifying. He shook his head and walked away, mumbling, "Damn them all, really?" He seethed with insidious malice toward all paragons, their sheer existence making him pale slightly in comparison. Then there were those who had been paragons for years who were very, very experienced. Northern's mind drifted toward Dante. The paragon was not a veteran yet. He was even the most recent but was a carrier of reckless and devastating onslaught. I wonder if he kept some cards hidden. Still, what else could there be? He already had the paragon's talent. Unless there was something he hadn't considered before, or had considered but wasn't remembering. The flame attack, however, had only affected one side of the mountain. And it was no coincidence. He had protected this place with void force. Reasons? Obvious. Northern took a soft but powerful leap, easily flying across an enormous distance and landing with the grace of a falling leaf. He continued forward casually, now treading on snow. A few seconds later he stopped. The girl stood before a slightly heaped mound of earth, gazing at it with a sullen expression. It didn't go in too deep. I didn't have the time or strength to make it. She sniffed and wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sharply tailored, vibrant suit of gold and black. Northern had never paid attention to her clothes before. She always wore a cloak over them. But now the cloak was gone, revealing the graceful outfit beneath. It clung to her like snakeskin, gracing her voluptuous form with dangerous elegance. Instead of long trousers, it ended in a flared skirt that barely reached mid-thigh. Her black boots stretched just past her knees, leaving a sliver of alabaster skin exposed. On one knee, a purplish bruise sat like a somber mark, and her face. It was strange how Northern was only now noticing her features, freed from the cloak's shadow. The pale blue of her eyes had been a facade, an illusion. Instead, a strange golden light flickered in her gaze, perfectly matching her flowing, sun-kissed blonde hair with its golden undertones. She was hauntingly breathtaking, like a mortal goddess. If this were Earth, Northern was sure she could play Aphrodite in any Greek mythological epic. She's very beautiful. Northern killed the thought before it could bloom, forcing his eyes back to the grave. Crap! I can't believe I'm thinking about that. Forgive me, Garyon. He closed his eyes briefly, remembering the short time he'd shared with the leader of the caravan. Garyon's death pained him, it stung badly. He would have lived if he hadn't been so disobedient. But for some reason, Northern didn't want to think about it that way, even if it meant lying to himself. What's wrong with me today? I hate lying to myself more than anything. He exhaled sharply and spoke, his voice cutting through the mountain wind like a cold blade. Should we try to meet up with the rest of the caravan ahead? Or do you think we should head back home? He spoke in consideration of the girl. Another thing he normally wouldn't do. But she was just human. And though she could hold her own, her strength would shatter in an instant before true destruction. So Northern thought to do her a favor and help her return home. Although, the girl's hand trembled for a moment before she clenched it tight. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. We need to meet up with the rest of the caravan and complete the mission. If nothing else, for Captain Garyon's sake. Northern sighed. Right? What was I expecting? Chapter 760, Traversing the Ruined Mountain. Matter-of-factly, Northern had expected her to turn down his offer to go back home. Based on the steady pattern of her fierce reactions since the first day of their troubled meeting, he suspected she would do the opposite. Defiance had become her nature. He could have scolded her for her brute, unreasonable behavior. But exhaustion weighed on his body, and he found no reason to waste the effort. Even after witnessing the bitter acerbity of battle, she remained stubborn. What little effect would his words have now? Instead, he focused his remaining energy on carving a path forward. With Garyon gone, the battered caravan had lost its leader, yet they still had direction. That man, Jester, he had been close to the stern Garyon. He would know the way forward. The immediate concern, however, was the fractured land ahead. The mountainscape had been reshaped, raw and unrecognizable. They had to survive it first. The girl visibly paled as she trudged forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mouth quivered, eyes stretching wider with each agonizing step over the warped land. No, this is logically impossible. Are you a paragon? Did you lie to us? Northern exhaled a slow, weary sigh. Why would I lie to you? What would I gain from it? She froze. Her wide, trembling eyes glistened with stunned apprehension. But, how is this possible? It makes no sense. Absolutely none. Northern ignored her and continued to carefully navigate the ruined and reborn mountain. With Garyon's death, finding the way forward before the mountain's rebirth would have been difficult. But now, with the land violently torn apart, revealing a dreadful molten path searing with red-hot flames, that task had grown into something far worse. Traversing was already dangerous. Now, They also had to watch for sudden bursts of steam erupting from the scorched earth, without warning, without mercy. She remained silent as they walked, Northern leading the way. But the disbelief in her eyes refused to fade. From time to time, she cast him wary glances, as if trying to process the impossibility of his existence. He didn't mind. He simply trudged forward, dissecting a way through the disaster. Hours passed. The girl's breath had grown heavy, pearls of sweat rolling down her face. Her alabaster skin, once untouched, now looked pale, almost drained. Northern was just as tired, but he showed no signs of it. Just how far had the caravan gone? The battle had not lasted more than 2 hours. Granted, he had spent more time dealing with the lesser mobs than the Rift Guardian itself. And yet, they had spent twice that time searching, and still there was no sign of the caravan. At least now, they were crossing a snowy expanse once again. Another mountain. Or was it the same one? Northern wasn't sure. But they were moving forward. The girl stumbled. Then, with a quiet groan, she slumped to the ground, leaning on her hands, her breath heavy. Is it really supposed to take this long? Midday had peaked. The day star's radiance had softened. Merciful now, though at times, it had been ruthless. But the biting cold had claimed dominance, the frozen terrain of the mountain once again victorious. Such strange anomalies were not uncommon in the Central Plains. The Star of Winter, after all, was said to brawl with the day star. It was friendlier with the moons than with the sun, and their battle played out in strange shifts, heat and cold warring throughout the day, even in winter. Here, in the mountains, that war was most pronounced. Northern stared into the distance, unsure of what to say. For the first time, a whisper of doubt crept into his confidence. Should I fly? Maybe I'd get a better aerial view. Use Chaos Eyes to scan the land from above. It was the most reasonable option. Yet something held him back. He had no idea what kind of creatures lurked in the skies, hidden in the clouds. And leaving the girl here alone, it wasn't ideal. But there was no way forward. And so, he made his decision. He would risk exposure. Glancing at her, he spoke evenly. Be careful. I'm going up to get a better view. See how far we are from them. He didn't wait for her response. With a deafening blast, he shot into the skies. The girl barely had time to react. Her eyes widening, hands instinctively clutching her skirt before her expression twisted into a small frown. Then her eyes widened again. That's right. He can fly. She had almost forgotten, the disastrous fall of Garion pushing the memory to the back of her mind. But now it came rushing back. How he had abruptly grabbed her, soaring over a vast distance in mere seconds. The thought alone summoned a faint, polished pink flush to her cheeks. She slapped her face, turning it an irritated red. Stop that nonsense, Roma. With a small huff, she looked up, squinting at the sky in an attempt to see him. But he was already too far. Northern, meanwhile, glanced downward, watching as she craned her neck, her expression a mix of frustration and curiosity. He clicked his tongue. What a weird thing. Shaking his head, he averted his gaze and focused on the task at hand. Her splintered eyes flared, effortlessly zooming in on the landscape like a natural pair of binoculars. From this height, the destruction was far more appalling. A side of the mountain looked as if a colossal infernal hand had shredded it from summit to base, leaving nothing but scorched ruin. Northern narrowed his eyes, retracing their path so far. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. An ugly realization dawned on him. Shame pelted his face like harsh droplets of rain. All this time he had been leading them in circles. He scratched his head sheepishly. I had no idea. I thought it was straightforward. But before he could dwell on his mistake, something else caught his eye. Something far more urgent. The slight look of shame on his face disappeared completely. His expression darkened. Something was wrong. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.